Welcome to In the Field. How's everybody doing? We have our special guest back with us for part two, um, Dr. Robert Bennett. He has a doctorate in physics from Stephen Tech, and he wrote his thesis on the rigid body motion and general relativity. We did have him on last week for part one. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you check it out so that you can have context for this show. We're very excited to have him on, and we're just going to let him take it away. So show respect to the guest as always, and we're honored to have him back. And without further ado, let's bring him on. Robert, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, Austin. How are you?
Good. Absolutely good. Well, okay. We're excited to hear what you have. So we're not gonna hold you back. We'll just let you take it away. And then if you want any interaction or any questions or need any help with anything, just holler at me.
Okay, understood. All right, I'm going to cover the things that I've encountered that bothered me in, let's say, the last 3 decades of scientific research. I presented some of them last time in part one, and I'm going to continue with that in this presentation. We're going to be using the scientific method as the epistemology for establishing what is truth. In addition, we'll be using philosophy, specifically realism, which requires that we discuss only things that occur in the real world, not in the mind of the scientists who are doing the modeling. And let me skip to the last slide. I think it was 46, which was on the Wang research. Oh. Yeah, I want to cover this because this was the last slide and I kind of rushed through it. If you recall, the Wang test was an answer to the criticism of Sagnac that it was done and tested a rotational ether. Wang used a conveyor to cause the ether to be dragged in a linear line, and the results were posted right down here in the corner in the graph. The results were basically that the test showed that in the lab and on the conveyor, the speed of light is c plus v. Now this is kinematics, meaning it's a measurement, not a prediction from a law of physics. Now special relativity gets destroyed by this because special relativity specifies that the speed of light is always c. So postulate 2 of special relativity is a dead item. In order to continue with the discussion of the model, consider what happens if we have the conveyor and the lab tested according to the laws of physics. According to the laws of physics, if the ether is moving past the conveyor, then the speed of light should be c plus v, and it is measured as c plus v in the lab. Sorry. Okay. If you notice, the conveyor is predicted to have a speed of c, but it actually has c plus v. My interpretation of this is that you're measuring in a non-lab frame. The lab result is correct, C plus V. The conveyor reads C. So there's two conclusions that I draw from the Wang test. Number one, the speed of light is not C, it's C plus V. Number two, it is only correctly measured when you're in the lab frame. And we'll see that this is confirmed by Newton's bucket and other experiments that we will look at in part 2. Now, I was introduced about 10 years ago to a book which recorded the visions that were given to a Catholic saint of the church in Bingen, Germany. Her name is Hildegard. And this book was recommended to me because of the astounding model that it presented, the cosmology and the structure of the cosmos was specifically modeled in a way that contradicted much of what modern science tells us. Now, the position that I have is that I believe anything, regardless of source, as long as I can test it with the scientific method and realism. So when I heard about this, these revelations, I said to myself, well, this will be easy. All I have to do is show that something in this book is contradictory to what I know to be true, and that will be the end of it. But in 10 years, I haven't found anything wrong with it, especially the part that supports the Aether model. Aether models are very hard to come by because the mainstream science suppresses almost all discussion of an Aether model. All right, over here we have the beginning of the Hildegard model. Hildegard says that the Earth is surrounded by 5 spheres consisting of fire, ether, water, air, and earth. When I told my philosopher friend, Wolfgang Smith, that when astronomers look in the sky, they don't see these 5 spheres. And he clued me into what a philosophical view is. He said, this is a symbolic representation of the universe. And it says that this outer layer of bright fire represents the source of energy that's coming into the world, and it's passing through the outer layers, which allow the change to take place, because everything that we see materially is composed of fire, ether, water, air, or earth. And of course, they are symbolic representations of fire energy, ether. Well, ether is ether, water is liquid, air is gas, and earth represents solid. So this is just a philosophical model, not a real model of what the world is composed of. All right, this diagram shows that the visions of Hildegard show 16 stars that are fixed. They don't rotate with the universe. And these are the source of winds. She calls them winds. I call them ether winds. The universe rotates with the stars. So that would mean all of the solar system objects also rotate. Hildegard says that the function of these stars is to generate ether winds that slow down the motion of the solar system objects. So the one I'm pointing to now is pointing to the moon. You probably can't see it, but it slows down the moon. This slows down the sun. The other ones slow down the planets. Over here, you see a model which shows the primary wind, which is the sun and the moon, the winds which slow down the planets. Those are the secondary winds. And then we have the third tertiary winds, which cause the moons of the planet to slow down. So that's the general model. And take note of the ether winds, which play an important role in explaining why the objects in the solar system do not rotate the same as the stars do, because of these retarding ether winds. Now, what could be the source of these winds? Psalm 147 says he named the stars. Well, Adam named the animals because he had dominion over them. If God is naming the stars, then he must have dominion over the stars. Psalm 33 says God breathed and the stars were born. The creation of Adam involved the breathing of the spirit into Adam in order to cause him to become alive. So this is telling us that the stars are alive. So the stars belong to God and they're alive. So my conclusion is what we're describing here is that the angels are sources of these ether winds, and that's the religious or the theological explanation of why we have the motion in the solar system that we do. We could go even further. In the book of Daniel, chapter 7, where Daniel is walking through heaven, he sees the Ancient of Days. And the Ancient of Days, God the Father, takes his seat. And then it describes a river of fire that was flowing out from before him. What isn't described is what happens to this river of fire. Well, that fits in nicely with the source of the energy that is provided for the ether winds and for running the entire universe. Mainstream says that there's no perpetual motion machine, that the universe was set in motion and it will eventually run down. This says that there is energy being supplied from the throne of God, and that's what runs the universe. All right, let's now look at the science of Hildegard. We know about a geostationary satellite, a geosat. The satellite stays above the same place on Earth. This only occurs at the equator. And the explanation from mainstream is the satellite is rotating the same as the Earth. Hildegard's explanation is that the Earth is not rotating. The rotation of the Earth is zero. And what is rotating is the ether around the Earth. We've already seen experiments that confirm that. And the rotation of the satellite is actually equal to the rotation of the sun and the moon, which is provided by the ether winds. So the rotation of the universe is in one direction, and the ether winds in the other direction at this location, at this distance from Earth, cause the satellite to be stationary. And so this explains, using the ether model, how the geostat satellite operates. Now let's look at ether gravity. Ether is considered to be static. Hildegard says there's a universal gravity, that the entire universe is like a balloon that's been filled with air, except it's not air, it's ether. So there is an enormous pressure all through the universe of the ether. We saw that with the Atsukowski chart, which showed that there's an enormous pressure that they measure for the free ether. All right, so we call that the pressure of the cosmos. It's a constant pressure everywhere. But then we have to explain, when you get near mass, the pressure changes. It isn't constant at every place. It isn't the same on the surface of the moon as it is on Earth. It changes according to the inverse square law. So let's see if we can fix that. Number two, let's consider what happens when you have atomic particles that are spinning. Then each one has a centripetal acceleration, centrifugal acceleration equal to v squared r. This pushes the ether around the particles away. If we use Bernoulli's equation, number 3, where the pressure and the speed are related by the equation that's given, then when the velocity goes up, the pressure goes down. That means each of these rotating particles, in which the Earth is composed, is pushing the ether around it away, causing a pressure drop, which is number 4. So the pressure near mass is less than the pressure in the cosmos. The surface gravity then is the sum of all of the atoms in the mass. So you have very low pressure caused by each atom, but you have an enormous amount of atoms. Gravity then becomes the pressure of the cosmos, predicted by Hildegard, minus the sum of all of the pressure of the atoms inside the mass. So it's really particle motion that causes gravity. The reason why the force of gravity is 1 over r squared, well, that's for a future study. We need quantum ether theory, basically, in order to predict that. Now, when Newton wrote the Principia in 1687, he presented, of course, the 3 laws of Newton. He also discussed something which was an exception. He found out when he spun a bucket full of water and tried to apply his 3 laws, actually the second law, F equals ma, that it didn't work in certain situations. This is known as the Newton bucket experiment. So we start with stationary water in the lab frame. And remember, Newton is looking at this because he's standing stationary on Earth, and that's the lab frame. What you see after the water starts spinning with the bucket is a depression in the water in the center. You get a vortex, a whirlpool formed, and you can predict that that is going to happen by using Newton's law for centrifugal acceleration, mv squared over r. The rotating water is subject to this law. It predicts that there will be a centripetal force, and so the law agrees with the result. We predict that the water will be thrown up the sides by the centrifugal force, and that's exactly what we see. Now let's pretend that there's a person on the bucket. Call it a bucketeer. This guy can make measurements from his point of view. To him, the bucket is not rotating. He's at rest, and he sees Newton and the lab rotating around him. So if Newton sees the bucket rotating clockwise, this guy sees Newton rotating counterclockwise. And we know that the result is going to be the same. If you're on the bucket, you have to see the same thing. You have to see a vortex formed, a whirlpool. But if you apply Newton's law to the guy on the bucket, to him the water is stationary because the water is rotating with the bucket. So the speed of the water measured from the bucket frame is 0. So the guy on the bucket would predict that the water surface is flat, but it's not. So Newton's law does not work on the bucket. It does work in the lab frame. There have been a lot of things through history, a lot of attempts to correct this. Mach's principle, which was stated almost 200 years after Newton talked about this, that principle is quoted incorrectly by mainstream. I give you 2 examples there. Physical law relating motion of distant stars to local inertial frame. So Mach is saying in that sentence that it's the distant stars that are rotating that somehow influence the water in the bucket. This is called an inertial influence. In another place in mainstream, I quoted, local laws are determined by the large-scale structure of the universe. Well, that means everything in the universe, including the Earth, contributes to the effect that we see, the rotation of the bucket in the Earth frame causing a vortex. Now, what I did was I looked at the sources. I looked at the book that Mach wrote. And what it says is such forces are produced by the relative rotation with respect to the Earth and the other celestial objects. So what Mach actually said is it's the rotation with respect to the Earth and the other celestial objects, which is not what is quoted in the mainstream textbooks. So Mach did say the Earth is an influence on this, which is correct. He said the other celestial objects also influence, but that's incorrect. So the interpretation of Newton's bucket is you must use the Earth as your reference frame, but you cannot use the stars. Now, what did Newton say about this experiment? He said, this is an absolute lab frame. An absolute reference frame. He said there's an absolute reference frame and there is a absolute time, an absolute measurement of time. But Newton didn't tell us where it is. That is correct. The lab is an absolute reference frame, but Newton didn't say that. He simply said an absolute reference frame exists, but he didn't say where it was. Now, I tried to update this experiment by doing something that's more familiar. Newton's bucket, the experiment is named after him, so I'm going to call this Bennett's hiker. We have, first of all, a hitchhiker frame, which is the same as the lab frame. If you have a car accelerating towards you as a hiker, and you ask, what do the laws of physics predict? Then the prediction is the force on the driver, Fd, is equal to the mass of the driver times the acceleration. So Newton's law says the driver should have a force exerted on him. And we all know this is true. If you're accelerating in a car, you can feel the car seat pressing on your back. And you could measure it with the appropriate equipment. So if you are in the hitchhiker frame, which is the lab frame, Newton's law is correct. Suppose you use the reference frame of the driver. In the driver's frame, you see the hitchhiker accelerating towards you with minus a acceleration. And you want the force on the hiker to be equal to the mass of the hiker times his acceleration. All right, the calculation shows that this is not zero. But we know that when a car passes you and it's accelerating, you don't feel any force. You may feel a slight breeze from the air that's moving past the car. But unlike the driver, anyone stationed in the lab frame will not feel any force. This is exactly the same as Newton found, that only in the lab frame, stationary on Earth, can the laws of physics be properly applied. Kinematics is an important concept. It means measurement. Kinematics means measurement. Kinematics means measurement. Kinematics means measurement. I said it 3 times because if you've heard something 3 times, supposedly that's supposed to be part of your permanent memory. How did kinematics arise? Probably the astronomers noted the motion of the stars, and they began to track it and to make up charts which would predict in the future where the stars would appear in the sky. So these circles became associated with measurements. And from that, we could interpret mathematical relationships. The acceleration of the stars must equal their speed squared over r. That's a consequence of the measurement. Galileo made measurements of a falling object, and he found that the speed of an object is proportional to the time, no matter what the weight of the object was. So he can generate from that a algebraic equation, a mathematical description of free fall, but all this is based on measurement. They're not applying any laws except using the measurements to generate the laws. So this is a process of induction. The law of the pendulum, same thing. You observe a pendulum swing, measure its period, and knowing the length and the acceleration of gravity, you can calculate the period. So the law is generated from measurements. Now, an important concept here is relative motion is valid. In kinematics, if I were 5 feet north of you, then you would have to be 5 feet south of me. That's an example of relative position. Repeat that with velocities, accelerations, and so on. And you find that measurements always obey relativity. So relativity is true for measurements. Or we could say observer reference frame independence. Kinematics is arguing from specific to general, and it measures the quantity of motion. And that's why mathematics is applied, because all you get from a measurement is a number, and you have to use that number to predict things in the future. Now, dynamics is the other branch of physics. If you were to study physics, you would probably choose either experimental physics, testing, or you would choose theoretical physics, which is prediction of future motion. The prediction of motion involves quantities that we discussed before, distance, velocity, time. In addition, you have quantities that are characteristic of whatever you're measuring. So mass, force, moment of inertia, charge, Q, all of these things are particular qualities of motion. In kinematics, you only trace the path or the trajectory of motion. In dynamics, you must include mass and force and other qualities in order to predict the motion. Relative motion is invalid, and we're going to show that. We've already shown it with Newton's bucket and with the hitchhiker experiment. The observer and reference frame dependence means that we have a lab or earth frame as an absolute frame. And we've used, as I said, the bucket and the hiker. And we will use an electromagnetic experiment, the Faraday experiment, to show that only the lab frame can be used in making predictions. So dynamics is always prediction, and kinematics is always measurement. Now, in the lower left, we see an example of how we're going to apply the laws of motion, how we're going to derive them. If you were a hiker hiking through the mountains and you wanted to go from A to B, there are many different paths you could use. You could use the red path, which goes over the mountain. You could use this one, which goes through a tunnel in the mountain. Or you could use the blue path from A to B. In fact, there's an infinite number of ways you could get from A to B. And let's say we want to know what is the fastest time that gets me from A to B. So this question was posed to mathematicians hundreds of years ago. And they came up with this law called the law of calculus, or variational principle. What it says is, if I take a quantity which represents the energy, the Lagrangian L, and that consists of the kinetic minus the potential energy, and it depends on the location Q. Q stands for some coordinate system, the velocities, and the time. So we need a clock. If we consider all of the paths that go from A to B in this example, and we ask what is the shortest time between them, then this variational principle is set to 0. And when it is calculated and simplified, it leads to what are called the Euler-Lagrange equations, which are these. So by performing these derivatives and applying it to the Lagrangian T minus V, you get the equation that predicts what is the shortest time between A and B. And this is quite an astounding accomplishment. It says that something I couldn't possibly do physically is done mathematically. We can predict what is the shortest path between 2 points if we know the energy change in between the 2 points. Now, the thing that they made a mistake on, this was done by mathematicians. They used generalized coordinates. They assumed you could use any coordinate system that you want. It turns out, however, from experiments, Newton's bucket, for example, that you must use the lab frame. So the mistake that is made by mainstream is in using arbitrary coordinates, arbitrary reference system. You must use the Earth system. Okay, this is something I borrowed from Austin's presentation. The only thing I want to point out is right here where Fred Hoyle says, it is also possible to take any point as the center, even in dynamics. No, not true. As I just described, you must use the lab frame as your reference point, as your center of calculation. Now, covariance was a subject that I was asked to cover. What is covariance? It's a question about how do reference frames affect physical laws? Does the motion of the observer, in other words, affect whether your physical laws are correct or not? Mathematically, we could say if I have an equation which involves the motion variables, and I ask if I change the coordinate system, like from Cartesian to polar, is the equation still the same form? Does a coordinate system change, like Cartesian to polar? If it doesn't change, then we have weak covariance, because all you're doing is changing the mathematical structure. If you change the reference system, though, not the coordinate system, if you have an observer on Earth and one on a satellite, and you ask, what are the changes in laws from if I go from Earth to satellite? If those equations are the same form, then you have strong covariance. For example, if F equals ma is true on Earth, is it true on the satellite, where F prime equals ma prime are the measurements made on the satellite? So that's covariance. This is an important factor in physics because there are two types of reference frames. There's the Galilean frame, where anything that's moving at a speed v obeys this formula. According to Einstein, in order to keep the speed of light constant, you must use Lorentz transformations, which are shown in this red box. In this chart, we're going to compare Newton and Maxwell laws according to whether we have no ether, or we consider the mainstream, which is Einstein covariance. All right, if we ask, are Newton's laws covariant? Well, they obey Galilean's law, and the answer is yes. Maxwell's laws, though, the laws of electromagnetism, do not obey Galileo's law. They obey the Lorentz law if you require that the speed of light is constant. In other words, if special relativity is true. So when in the 1900s, when they knew that there was a conflict between mechanics and electromagnetism, they had a choice. Do I make Lorentz Galilean or do I make Galileo Lorentz? But what they chose, the mainstream choice was, we'll make Newton's laws obey Lorentz transformations. And what that means is the gamma factor, which is the square root in the denominator, which contains the v squared over c squared, that's going to be forced into the equations, even though it does not appear in the Galilean equations. So by forcing Lorentz to be used for both mechanics and electromagnetism, the consequence of that was that the v squared over c squared became part of what is experimentally measured, because it's part of the equations, but it is not part of the equations when it's Galilean. All right, so the correct prediction of covariance will be making mechanics and electromagnetism both invariant under Galilean transformations. Okay, we're going to look at electromagnetic induction and look for any violations of relativity. I hope the guys have the video set up, and if so, we can look at the video before I continue with the slides.
Yep, pulling it up now. All right, you're good to go, sir.
Okay, I'm back with a small screen and myself in the lower left.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. I need the full screen.
There you go. I think it's at
Oh,
full screen.
okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. I can't control the slides.
I don't know. Make sure you click on the screen, the actual slides, and it should work. If not, you can maybe try to reshare it.
Do it again here.
Yeah, you can if it's not working. In the world. Oh. He accidentally dipped out. Well, I will take this time. So someone said no sound. Alan, maybe you can call him, help him get back in. So
On it. There was no sound on that video, by the way. It was just like to read. Sorry about that. It's kind of a boring video, but it falsifies what Einstein was putting forward for on electrodynamics. You know how he was trying to explain the relative motion with the magnet and the conductor. So it's a complete falsification of that. I'm going to call Bennett and make sure he's getting squared away.
cool. So yeah, just to address some of the stuff in the chat, we did get a super chat that's not aimed at him, and I can read it. Let me come over here until he gets back. And a lot of people they want to talk about flat Earth, right? Right now we're discussing is the Earth in motion. We're discussing the current paradigm. We're discussing the failure that is relativity, right? That's what we're discussing right now. Okay, and this is incredibly important information that completely refutes the mainstream model at the highest levels, right? And that the position that we occupy is central to all the motion in the sky. The next step would be talking about, what exactly is it? All right. Those are 2 questions. So Craig, thank you for the super chats. And ambient guitar music. Love your work. Witsit? You're the man. Thank you for the kind words and for supporting the channel. Thank you for the $5 super chat. So yeah, there you go. He should get back in a second and we will continue. But I just encourage people to try to really pay attention because I know it's a lot of information, but it's super important. Super important, right? So, and please, as I always say, respect the guest, man. When people come on here, we respect them. Okay. I mean, if you create some hostile environment, you can't really expect to get high quality guests. I don't know why people do that. So please be respectful. All right. Let's see if you guys have anything. And just to just to clarify so everyone understands, we're talking about, for one, he brought up how Wang did the linear interferometer test, right? Detect linear motion with interferometry, which specifically shouldn't happen. They say that the reason that we can't actually, you need to be less emotional. That's ironic. She's been spiraling the whole time. They said that we can't detect the motion of the Earth around the sun because it's linear. Okay, here we go. I think he's back. Oh, let me, Alan, maybe you need to remove the other screen.
Do I do?
Yeah, we're good. You can go ahead and put your headset on. We're good. You're in.
I'm gonna mute him because it's gonna be loud.
Good call. All right, here we go. All right, welcome back, sir.
Okay.
All right, and then go ahead and open that that Google your presentation tab and then share it again, and we can pick up right where we left off.
So I hit present again.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Will you stop sharing your screen?
Oh yeah, no problem. Let's see. Yes.
Oh no, not that one.
Flatlist says relativity in shambles today.
Dude, it's a rough day for relativity.
Why is that?
Well, we just watched the Faraday paradox falsify the relative motion with the magnet and the conductor situation that he was trying to explain with this kinematic nonsense of contraction.
Oh. Okay, I have Faraday's anomaly on the screen.
Yeah, we played out the video for you, and then you were just about to talk on it.
Let me.
No, dude, no.
Yeah, I get everyone keeps asking about that. We'll talk about that towards the end. Okay. And I can try to clear some things up while he's coming back. So they say like, okay, that Michelson-Morley didn't detect the alleged orbit of the Earth around the sun, right? Well, they say, oh, it's because it's actually moving in a straight path. It just appears curved because of the bending and warping of space-time. So it's a geodesic path, right? So it's changing direction, but it's not changing direction. And that's why you can't detect it, because the interferometer won't detect linear motion. Well, Wang proved that you can detect linear motion with the interferometer, right? That's what that was about. And then whenever he showed the quote a second ago from one of my presentations where he says basically it's equally valid. You could take any point as the center, even with dynamics. He says that's incorrect because you need the stationary lab frame, meaning like the terrestrial frame on the Earth. You need that stationary lab frame to actually make the dynamics work. So you couldn't just take anywhere as the center. You need a stationary lab frame. What he was talking about there. And yeah, just like with anything, you gotta familiarize yourself with some of the information. And what you find out is that it actually starts to make a lot of sense. Thank you for inviting Dr. Bennett. Yeah, shout out to Alan. Alan's the one that got him on here. Shout out to Space Audits. Go show him some love on YouTube. And then we will read off the super chats after the presentation. So if anyone has a question, make sure you address it to him or make it obvious that the question is for him. And if he has time, I believe that we're going to be able to interact some after the presentation. That's why we're not really interrupting anything. We want to make sure he gets through the whole thing. And then we will interact with him afterwards, and we will ask him questions on the super chat if he has time. So if you have any questions about the presentation in general, or for me, or to direct to him, just super chat it, and we will read them off at the end. And then shout out to those on Rokfin as well. We will also read that. RG the artist, welcome back, brother. Thank you so much for the $10 tip. Then I responded to your other message. We'll have to talk about that. I'm not sure what's going on. All right, there you go. Toby sent another one for him. In debates, why not talk about moon brightness? I don't know specifically what you mean, to be honest. If you want to, give a follow-up comment to kind of clarify what you mean, talk about it how. I think they sufficiently created a model that can kind of account for the brightness or lack thereof. But thank you for the $20, I guess 20 pounds, super chat, ambient guitar music. Thanks for supporting the channel. Yeah. And just a reminder while we're here, some housekeeping stuff. I have, I'm doing my atheism debunked presentation tonight. So that should be cool. I'll show you guys the thumbnail, and that'll be 9 p.m. Eastern. So I had a presentation I did earlier before this, and then we have this, and then we have that atheism debunk stream tonight. So stay tuned for that. Also share this to people so they can kind of understand what's going on. And just a quick reminder while we're still housekeeping, email in the field guests@gmail.com if you have any suggestions or connections regarding who we should have on in the field in the future. But like I said, tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern, Atheism Debunked. And you'll want to definitely set that aside and try to remember to come see it and share it, because it'll be a good way to help reach people and show them the absurdity of that position. Come over here. Hey, what's it? It's Patty the Flatty. What's going on? Thank you for the support. Awake but not woke. Yeah, they stole that word. Ask him if water lays flat when at rest. I don't know why it's so redundant, right? Like I get like, yes, we know you guys want to talk about that. Right now, we're not talking about that, right? It's not that big of a deal. Everyone just calm down, right? Like if we're presenting specific evidence that refutes the claim that the Earth is tilted, wobbling, spinning, and revolving around the sun, that is a direct refutation of the mainstream model we were all propagandized with. Arguably, one of the most important parts of this discovery is that, well, no, actually, the Earth isn't insignificant little tiny speck of dust in the corner of a universe that doesn't matter, and it's all random and chaotic. No, in fact, it is in the center. It's a very special position. That's one of the biggest truths that we learn in this discussion. Okay. And so if you break up the model claim into three primary points, you get the motion, the curvature, and the claim that it's in a vacuum of space. So we're currently discussing the motion. We're discussing the evidence, the specific measurements that show that the Earth is not in motion, whether that be rotating or revolving. Okay, so that's what we're currently discussing. Okay, Robert, I see you're back. Boom, there we go. Alan, we're like going back and forth. That's funny.
Dude, I know.
All right, we're gonna keep you muted, brother, just until you put the headphone back. Are you not wearing the headset?
Let's see.
Hey, Robert, if you can hear us, we can go ahead and put the headset on. Nice. All right, cool. Welcome back. Sorry about that, guys. Little technical difficulties, but we're back now. Austin covered for you, so whenever you're ready to pick up, you're good to go, man.
I'm not sure I'm on.
Oh, you're on.
The screen is on, and I'll put it full screen. So there, everything working?
I still got the Google heading.
He's not able to change slides.
Let's see. Yeah, I can change the slides.
Oh, okay.
So everything looks good on our end. What's wrong over there?
Let's see. We have. All right. Let me go with this. I can still see.
Okay.
It's everything's smaller, but I'll work with this.
All right, sounds good.
Whenever you're ready.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
Yep, you're good.
Hey, Robert, can you hear me?
Yeah, you want me to start now?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay, what we saw in the video was the actual experiment which tests Faraday's law. In this slide called Faraday's anomaly, we're going to see why some of the predictions of Faraday's law are not true. First of all, what is Faraday's law? The EMF, the voltage produced, which is the generator principle, depends on a charge, Q, moving through a magnetic field, B, with a speed, V. And what we must have is the speed of the conductor, C, relative to the magnet. So Faraday's law originally said you must measure the speed of the relative speed of the copper, the conductor, and the magnet, the iron. What you saw in the experiment was a copper disc, which is the conductor, located directly above an iron disc, which provides the magnetism. A motor provides the capability of spinning either one independently. And up here we have two brushes which pick off the voltage between the inside and outside of the conductor. And as you saw in the video, the wires connect to an oscilloscope, and you saw whether there was voltage produced or not. So I'm going to go through the results, the results of the test for those that are important. In this diagram, oh, come on. In this diagram, we see a chart of all the possibilities.
If you just kind of like click on the left of the slide, yep, it should go away. There you go.
All right.
Okay.
The chart shows that there are 8 possibilities for rotating disk, that is the copper, rotating magnet, or the meter rotating. We are only going to consider the meter as stationary. So there's only going to be 4 possibilities. Number 2, line 3, 5, and 6. Those are the ones that we consider where the meter is stationary, the oscilloscope. And in this case, the disk rotates and the magnet is stationary. So Faraday's law would predict that there's relative motion between the two. And over here, we see the voltage is correct as predicted by Faraday's law. On line 3, the disk rotates and the magnet rotates. Now, according to relativity, the two are rotating together. There's no relative motion, so there should be no voltage. But in this column, we see in red, there is a voltage. So line 3 violates Faraday's law if you use relativity. The other ones that we want to check are meter stationary, so that's line 5. The disk is stationary and the magnet is stationary, and that's no relative motion, and there is no voltage. That's correct. Disk stationary and magnet rotating, that should produce a voltage, but it doesn't. So this is the second violation of Faraday's law using the law of relativity. What I want to look at next is the summary. When the disk spins, we found that the test agreed with Faraday's law, and so did special relativity. Now, if I use, instead of the relative motion between the conductor and the magnet, I use the motion of the conductor relative to the Earth, the lab frame, that also agrees. When I considered the magnet was spinning and the disk wasn't, then I get no for special relativity, and that doesn't agree with what the experiment shows, which when they both spin, there should be no EMF produced. So there are two conditions in which Faraday's law are violated. But if I use, instead of conductor relative to magnet, I use the conductor relative to the laboratory, I do correctly predict the voltage, the generator principle. So SR in electromagnetism is rejected, and the alpha model, meaning one in which there is an absolute lab frame corresponding to, which predicts correctly the results that we get. So we see in mechanics and we see in electromagnetism that the lab frame must be used in order to predict correctly using the laws of physics. Now, there's something that was just discovered recently called the vector potential. I identify it with the ether, which is why I call it the ether vector potential. A quick review of what vectors are. A vector is something with size and direction. We indicate it with a bold letter. The vector could be representing a line in space, or it could be representing something rotating. The way we tell what's happening, we use the inverted delta operator. We use the nabla. The nabla applied to a vector indicates whether the vector is changing in shape or in space. So this is called a gradient. The nabla plus a dot applied to a vector is called a divergence. That tells you if there is any radial change in the vector. In other words, is it getting bigger or smaller? The notation with the nabla and an X is called a curl. The curl tells you whether there is a change in the rotation of the vector. So this is a way of conveniently telling us, using mathematics, whether a vector is getting bigger or smaller, or whether it's rotating, or whether it's constant, then it would be 0. So the curl finds everything that is rotating. If we apply the divergence, as we do here, then the divergence finds everything that is radially changing. Well, the first one eliminates all expansion, the curl, and the divergence only picks up what's radial. So the two together must calculate 0 for the amount of change. So this is an identity that's always true. For example, in Faraday's law, if you wanted to interpret this, you would say the curl of E indicates that the electric field has what? A rotation. So if the curl of E is not 0, then there must be a change in rotation. And this must equal the time rate of change of the magnetic field B. So this is how you can look at Maxwell's laws and interpret what they actually mean. We know the divergence of B is equal to 0, which means magnetic field lines never end. They always consist of circles or loops. suppose we let the vector B be the curl of some vector A. Now, mainstream picked A as the symbol, but it's interesting because ether is what it really represents. If B is the curl of A, then the divergence of the curl of A must be 0 because of this identity. If we use the other Maxwell's laws, we find the electric field is the gradient of a scalar potential phi minus the rate of change of A with time. Now, if you use the electric and magnetic fields, there are 6 of them, 3 in space for each one. But if you use the vector potential A, you have only 4. Maxwell's laws, which are expressed as electric and magnetic fields, simplify to only 4 things that are needed if you use an ether field, an ether vector potential. And this is more fundamental than E and B because from the vector potential, I can determine what the values of E and B are. Now, there's an experiment in that recently was done, which connects electromagnetism with quantum mechanics. It's called Aharonov-Bohm test. If you have a solenoid, an electromagnet, it produces a strong magnetic field inside and almost 0 outside. If we ask what happens to electrons when they go around the cylinder, then that's predicted by Schrödinger's equation. So this is quantum mechanics being applied to a classical electromagnetic case. Electrons are being sent around a electromagnet, a solenoid, and we can ask, what are the predictions that quantum mechanics makes? The diagram down here shows that if we set an electron beam, 2 of them, through a barrier around the magnetic field of the solenoid, then the magnetic field, according to theory, it's non-existent outside the solenoid, so there should be no effect. But quantum mechanics shows that there's an interference pattern if I combine the electron beam from the original source. What this means is that a classical electromagnetic theory would predict that there is no effect on the electrons, but quantum mechanics says, yes, there is, because we see an interference pattern. So this proves that the A potential, the A vector potential, must be used in order to predict correctly what happens in this case, which is predicted and confirmed by quantum mechanics. All right, GPS. GPS is considered and promoted as a proof of relativity. Well, let's see if that's true. We have already tested with GPS satellites whether if you send a signal all the way around the Earth with a group of satellites, that nothing will change. And the reason nothing changes is, even though there's an ether field, the speed is c plus v all the way around, so there's no change. If you do the equivalent of the Michelson-Gale experiment and you use the GPS satellites to send out 2 beams at the same time in opposite directions, then this should be familiar. This is the Sagnac effect. When the beams return, if there's a difference, then we have an interferometer effect, and that proves that there is an ether speed that's affecting the path of the light. Now let's apply that to GPS. GPS works by having a ground station connected to a satellite with a communication between them. And then down here is your receiver, the pocket version of GPS that you use to determine what your position is. What we claim for an Aether model is that when the satellite is in different positions, the effect of the Aether on the signal will change. When it's on the horizon is different than when it's when the satellite is directly overhead. So what you should imagine on this line right here, which represents the signaling between satellite and ground station, that the speed c is equal to the speed, the speed of light is equal to c plus the speed of whatever the Aether is at this location. So if you correct for that speed, you can use c as c times t as the correct distance between the satellite and the ground station. And so that's the interpretation of GPS using Aether. You must use that to correct the signaling between both of them. Now, what does the conventional or mainstream explanation consist of? They say, in order to use the GPS system, you must use the ECI reference frame. ECI stands for Earth-centered inertial. In other words, the star frame. If you were in the ECI frame, you would see the stars frozen above you. They never move because the Earth would be moving with the stars. Or if you want, the Earth and the stars are moving together. And so relative to each other, their speed is 0. They use GPS time. In other words, they don't use the time that we use when we measure the rotation relative to the sun or the stars. They correct for the motion of the stars using this so-called ECI frame. It's Earth-centered, but it uses the stars, not the Earth, as the reference frame. The ECEF is the Earth-centered, Earth-fixed frame. That is the frame that we're used to, the one that uses the motion of the sun and the stars in order to set our clocks. If you use the ECI frame, what you're saying is that the stars never move. They're always overhead, the same stars. What that means also is that the solar day is no longer 24 hours, but it's 1 year long. In other words, if you were really in the ECI frame, it would take 6 months of daylight and then the same number, 6 months of darkness with light at night in order to agree with what you see. If this were true, then we would have lunar tides that change every 6 weeks, not every 12 hours. And if you've ever seen the movie The Earth Stood Still, Hollywood has actually taken this idea and shown that this would produce tremendous winds across the surface of the Earth because one side of the Earth is 6 months in darkness, while the other side of the Earth is 6 months with direct sunlight. So obviously it is not observed. All of these changes that I list here are not what we see. And yet they claim this is the frame that you must use in order to make GPS work. And the reason they have to do this is that by using this frame, you're using a frame in which Aether speed is 0, and therefore the speed of light is c, not c plus v. So ECI is a fantasy frame. It is used by mathematicians who think they are physicists, but it doesn't correspond to reality. The ECI frame that is used for GPS calculations is not the frame of reference that we use in order to do ordinary physics. I was asked about E equals mc squared. Well, before 1905, there were several people who said E equals some constant times mc squared, Lorentz per Poincaré. They used electromagnetic mass in order to calculate it, so they got 4/3 of mc squared. So the relationship between E and m and c squared was known. The only thing that was different was the coefficient. Some people had anything from 1/2 to 1 as the coefficient of mc squared. Now, what did Big Al add? Well, he said that the energy includes the kinetic energy, which was a contribution. He said that K equals 1, which is correct. And he said it's all derived from special relativity. Well, that's incorrect because special relativity is false. E equals mc squared does agree with ether models. We've spoken of how if ether were condensed from the free state to the bound state, a rotating ether would have energy, and the amount of energy would be measured by the amount of mass that it has times c squared. So this is a confirmation of ether, and Einstein did contribute, I must admit, to the 1922 Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect. He did deserve that. That was a major contribution to the world of physics. Okay. All right, stellar reference frame is often used in physics. Well, what are the problems with that? Well, no diagram is possible because where would you place an observer if you had the star reference frame? There are many stars. They are all different distances from Earth. So where would you place it? We can't put an observer on the stars, so it's not testable. So it fails the scientific method. The sun is a star, but the stellar frame is not the heliocentric reference frame. So those who claim heliocentrism is correct cannot use the star frame, at least logically. Interstellar motion consists in asking which star is the stellar reference frame. Suppose we had binaries. Which one would you choose? The definition is inconsistent. In the Andromeda reference frame, the Earth would be part of the stellar frame. But when we're on Earth, the Andromeda is part of the stellar frame. So the frame changes depending on which solar system you're in or which galaxy. I'm going to switch gears. This is a talk on problems in physics, and that includes biology, it includes geology, it includes things like the claims that Noah's flood never occurred. If we look at the Grand Canyon evidence and we ask, what about the model that mainstream has, that all of the sediment in the ocean is deposited slowly by mud that is carried down to the bottom slowly over hundreds, thousands, even millions of years, and that builds up layers at the bottom of the ocean, and that's what that forms the layers that we use when we excavate and look for fossils. Well, what we see in the evidence of nature is that the sediment layers all around the world show rapid layering. We actually see trees that have been embedded in different layers, but if the layers were laid down thousands of years apart, that couldn't have been possible. We see sea life far above sea level. We see the bones of fish and plants that normally would live in the tropics. We find them at the top of Mount Everest. We find the same layers all across the world in different continents. And we also see that there is no erosion. There's no sign in the layers that they have been weathered or that they have been eroded by rainfall. Now, recent experiments have shown that if I perform experiments in a flume and I let muddy water run through a stream, mimicking a mountain stream, then the deposit of sediment does not occur vertically, but horizontally. And that's shown in this diagram. If you have muddy water carrying sediment in rapid water, it will actually progress, as is shown here, forming layers step by step. Here's a cross-section of what happens. The turbulence in front of the formation causes a separation in density, not in size. So we have a separation which becomes, as you see here in a real photo, a section of layers. Now this is a few centimeters thick, and this was produced in only an hour in a flume. So if you had running water for, let's say, a week, you could explain all of the layers that we see across the world. Okay, you also have evidence all across the world. There is in the history of people's indications that there was a flood, and it was a global flood because it affected all of the people at the same time. The Chinese even have a pictograph that shows a boat with 8 people in it, an indication that they knew of the story of Noah's Ark. The fossils they find also are not just bones, but include the flesh and indications of recent burial. And that would agree with the flume model, which says that the layers were formed horizontally, not vertically. A recent example of this is Mount St. Helens. In the picture, you see the 70-foot valley that was formed 2 months after the mudslide after Mount Helens. The snow melted from the heat of the volcano, and it created tremendous volumes of water that washed away the sides, as you see here. Now, if I asked Mainstream to come and test the rocks here, this is what they have found. They found that the rocks range from 350,000 to 2.8 million. And that is an indication that they use in dating the fossils that they find. But we know that this is totally false because we know that this 70-foot valley was formed, 40 years ago, 1980. And it is not 350,000 or millions of years old. It's only a few decades old. So the method that they use for rock dating, and from which they tell us that the fossils are millions of years old, is a false science. The rocks that are found at Mount St. Helens prove this. Now, in biology, we also have some scientific propaganda. Years ago, we were told that there's areas of DNA, which they call junk DNA, which do nothing. They do not build proteins, and it was not understood what was the reason for the DNA sequences that they found. They called it junk because they said evolution must have been testing the biology to see what was successful. And this is the garbage can. This is the code that didn't work. But then we found out that this is actually metacode. It actually controls when different parts of the DNA are active and when they are not. And this is important for the growth of an animal because you have to control when certain organs and functions start and when they stop. So they find the DNA is actually like a modern operating system in a computer. It has data, control, memory. It can even repair itself. In year 2000, the Genome Project was completed. That was a mapping of the entire human genome, and it was predicted that this would create vast knowledge of how DNA works and vast improvement in medicine. Well, that hasn't turned out to be the case, because by converting the sequence of amino acids, ACGT, into something that can be understood by their own language, what they actually resulted in doing is converting from one language that they didn't understand to another language that they didn't understand. It's like converting from Sanskrit to Swahili. If you don't understand either one, what good is it? Some progress has been made, but it's basically been done with experiments that don't involve the human genome. Now, in this column, we are told that we can trace evolution according to the number of chromosomes that are present in the DNA. For example, a worm has 2 chromosomes. The other end of the scale, we have a fern, which has 216 chromosomes. If evolution is true, then the fern should be the most advanced biological state of evolution. But that's hardly true. The human actually turns out to be somewhere in the middle with 46 chromosomes. We are told that we evolved from the apes, like the chimp, but how can that be? The chimp has 48 chromosomes, which means it should be higher evolved than the worm, the fly, and so on, but also higher than the human. So what we are being told in this chart is that humans did not evolve from chimps, but chimps evolved from humans. I mean, that is the conclusion based on the chromosome evidence. Then we have from radiology an example of polonium creation proof. When we have a radioactive decay of uranium, it decays into many products, but the ones we're interested in are the ones down here, PO, 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 polonium. 3 isotopes of polonium can be formed. If you take a rock that contained uranium, then you would see the decay products indicated by the strength of the alpha energy that each one had. In other words, each isotope that decays would create a different circular pattern inside the uranium. And that's a way that you can tell what, number one, what isotope is present and how old this is. Now, some rocks have only 2 isotopes of polonium, and some have only 1. This one produces a radioactive halo in the uranium without being accompanied, without the other patterns that you would expect from the other paths. What this means is that the polonium-210 must have been created separately from all of the decay chain. We have an example then in the rock of something that decayed as after it was created, not as part of a sequence of radioactive decays, which would produce this pattern in the rock. So this is more indication that the claim that you can date information by the decay of uranium is false, because some of the products that we see were directly created without uranium. There is a alternate theory of how the Earth was, how the geology was changed during the time of Noah. After about 200 years, someone named Peleg was mentioned in the Bible, and the Bible says that in the time of Peleg, the world was divided. The word divided is ambiguous. Does divided mean that the earth was physically divided, or does it mean that the people on the earth were divided? Well, most people take it to be the Tower of Babel being described, and it refers to the separation of the different cultures into different languages and the spreading of all of humanity over the earth. There is a model, though, for taking this to mean the world was divided. Here's some of the indications, some of the experimental evidence that indicates that you can't explain volcanic activity, warm oceans, heavy snow, volcanic aerosols, and all of that using Noah's flood, because Noah's flood occurred very slowly over 40 days. It didn't occur with any volcanic activity, and it didn't involve an ice age. This theory is called shock dynamics. You can look it up in Google, and it says that about 200 years after Noah's flood, a tremendous asteroid struck what was originally a continent, a single continent called Pangaea, and it split the continent into the ones that we see today. The impact area is the Indian Ocean, and as you can see by the arrows, different parts of the original single mass of land was spread out over the surface of the Earth. You can see from the diagram that South America matches very well with the eastern coast of Africa. And there's other places on Earth where the same can be said. So there's a lot of visual proof for this theory that originally the land was one, and then it spread. It spread into spread all over the world. Shock dynamics. I don't know if you've heard of the Pioneer anomaly, but it was popular years ago. We've sent this spacecraft called Pioneer 1 and 2 and Voyager 1 and 2, so that eventually they go beyond Pluto. They go into beyond the solar system and into outer space. I think at least one of them is still functional. We can still communicate with it. But the purpose of including this is that when they communicate with the satellites and they're out at a distance beyond Jupiter, let's say Saturn or Neptune, they find that there is a difference in the predicted time based on Newton's law and the time that is measured by the electronic signals that are sent back and forth to the spacecraft. So this chart shows that once you get around, let's say Saturn, you get this effect of a change in time. And this is interpreted as an acceleration because acceleration is the change in speed over the change in time. If the time changes, then so does the acceleration. So the problem here is if I use time based on gravity, that is on the motion of the sun and the stars, then I have a certain clock, gravity time. If I use the time of decay of a radioactive atom like cesium, then a cesium atomic clock will tell time according to the number of vibrations of the cesium. And what we see in this experiment with Pioneer is that the two clocks do not agree. Using ether theory, we can say that there is an ether effect on the electromagnetic time because they're assuming, remember, that when they communicate with the spacecraft, the speed of light is c. But we know that it's actually c plus v, and you must know what the ether speed is in order to correctly determine the distance and the time. So the so-called pioneer anomaly can be explained by the ether that exists between the spacecraft and Earth. That affects the signals, but it does not affect gravity. So the time that they calculate with electromagnetic signals is incorrect, but they could make it correct by including the ether. Now, they say that Earth is proven to rotate because of very long baseline interference or interferometry. VLB, very long baseline interferometry. What they're talking about is distances like across the surface of the Earth, which is shown in this diagram, two observatories which are beyond the horizon, thousands of miles apart, can view the same radio source in the sky. And the time that it takes for the signal from the star to reach the observatories depends on the distance. And for one observatory, it will be an extra distance, which means slightly longer. The diagram shows this distance as the speed of light c times the time t. Now, they said that we know that the Earth is spinning, and so we can use the fact that the Earth is spinning to eliminate the number of observatories from 2 to 1. So assuming that the Earth is rotating, this method of calculating the Earth's rotation is incorrect, because you will not get the effect if you consider that the Earth is spinning. You must use a stationary Earth and the two locations on the stationary Earth. So this claim that VLBI shows Earth rotation, that's incorrect. Big Bang is a cherished theory of astronomers and astrophysicists. The world presumably began with an explosion 13.5 billion years ago, and we are now seeing the after effects of that explosion when we look at the sky. Let's go through the mainstream physics explanation of why the starlight that we see is shifted to the red, and that's shown down here. The wave equation is C equals frequency times wavelength, and you use C because it's special relativity, and so there's no ether. If you solve that equation, then you get that there is a shift or change in the wavelength divided by the wavelength. And using this measurement, they find that the stars are receding, and this is supposedly the proof that the Big Bang occurred. But if there is no change in wavelength, there's no radial velocity, and there would be no Big Bang. Let's consider the ether version of redshift. If the stars are emitting ether along with the light, then the speed of the ether when it's emitted must be applied to the wave equation. So you get C plus V is equal to frequency times wavelength. And again, the V represents the speed of the ether. Divide by C, which is the frequency over the Earth measured wavelength. And you get V over C equals delta lambda over lambda 0, which is exactly the same as the Doppler shift. So what is this saying? If we use ether being emitted by the stars as the reason for the redshift, then we no longer have reason to use the Doppler shift to explain or claim that all of the stars are receding from us. All right, let me. Okay, so we can claim that if we use an ether model, there is no star motion. The stars are actually stationary in the sky if they emit light and ether. So this is one way to disprove the Big Bang, and it uses ether emitted by the stars as the explanation. If you've heard of dark energy, that is the claim that the observed recession of the stars is actually speeding up. That is, as the stars get further away from us, they move even faster. What's happening there is the same reason. If ether is being emitted, then the amount of ether emitted by each star determines what you consider the speed. So we have a false interpretation of what the redshift means, and we can correct it by using ether emission. Another recent discovery from 3 different projects, satellites that scan the sky, determined that there is an interesting range of electromagnetic radiation in the microwave region that comes to us from all directions. This is a map of what the different projects, WMAP, COBE, and Planck, discovered. What they discovered is that the sky is basically at a temperature of 2.73 degrees Kelvin. That is above zero, above absolute zero. The colors that you see in the diagram represent slight changes from that 2.73. It is slightly below in the blue areas, and it's slightly above in the red areas. This is supposedly confirmation of the Big Bang, but we saw that stellar ether emission can explain that. Now, the way they analyze this is to consider that the sky is producing all the same color. This is called a monopole. Then they consider what if if the 2 different sources were producing this pattern. Then you would have a blue and a red section. This is called a dipole. Then you have 4 different sources, which is the quadrupole. And you have the octopole, and so on. If you keep adding these, you get a pattern which can be used to eventually match what you see as the actual CMB map. So this multipole analysis is the way they break down the colors or the spectrum that you see in the CMB. And what do they actually see? Well, they see something that they call an axis of evil. Notice that they're calling something which they measure with a moral judgment, saying it's evil. They've done the same thing with Airy. They called Airy's experiment Airy's failure. Well, Airy's failure actually proved that the Earth is at rest and that there's an ether wind affecting the starlight. And that's why they called it a failure. The MMX was called a null result, but it wasn't null. It was just less than they expected. It wasn't zero. What's interesting about the CMB pattern, let's first analyze what the colors and the location mean. If you're on the ecliptic, that is on the plane of the sun and the earth, then that's the black line that you see here going from left to right. The dipole that I talked about, which is the two sources in the sky, one dipole end is close to the ecliptic here, and up here you see it's close too. Other multipoles like the quadrupole and the octopole, they are also close to the ecliptic. Well, that's kind of unusual because that means that they aren't randomly distributed in the CMB map. They're close to the plane which contains the Earth and the Sun. If you do the analysis, a dipole actually is located 14 degrees from the equinox. The equinox is where the sun crosses the equator. That direction in space is 14 degrees from the dipole. The dipole is 11 degrees from the ecliptic. And if you figure out what the odds are that the dipole and the quadrupole and the octopole are all very close in their angle to the direction of the equinox and the ecliptic, then you calculate a probability of 1 chance in 100,000 approximately that this is all random. So the sky is not a random distribution of microwave energy. Most of it seems to be coming in a direction which corresponds to the location of the solar system, the ecliptic and the equinox. Now, the CMB model says that if you were, let me see, I think that's the next slide. Yeah. The CMB map says that the dipole is located at 264 right ascension, 48 degrees declination. That turns out to be close to Leo, the constellation Leo. We had the previous slide showing that we had a very low probability of having all of these low angles relative to the Earth and the ecliptic and the equinox. Now, the CMB is supposed to be the map of the universe that everybody sees. If you were on Andromeda looking at the sky, you would see the same sky as we see here. So this is like saying, if you went into your backyard and looked at the sky, you would see the same thing as your neighbor does, or anybody else on Earth would see the same thing. So everyone's backyard must look the same. And yet we know that if you were on a different planet, you would see a different sky. How is it that the Earth can have this particular location for the dipole and the other multipoles of the CMB? It is more than chance, as we see. There's more than 1 chance in 100,000 that this is more than chance. All right, in quantum mechanics, we have something that also disproves relativity. It's called quantum entanglement. Suppose we have two particles that are spinning in opposite directions, but they are connected together. So we have a particle that consists of these two oppositely spinning particles. If we take one of them and move it to a far location, separate the two by thousands of miles, their spin still will be one spin up, the other spin down. The total spin will be 0. If we measure one of them, say it's spin up, then we know immediately the other one is spin down. In other words, the information about what the other one is doesn't have to be determined right next to the object, but we can actually determine a measurement thousands of miles in space. In fact, the information travels faster than the speed of light. So this is another disproof of relativity, because quantum mechanics in this example shows that the information can travel faster between the observer and the object being measured faster than light. Oh. Okay, so it shows that the speed of light is greater than c. I don't think I have to cover the others. Now, it's interesting that we live in a world in which there is limitations in space and time. But there are ancient indications in ancient writings, like in the Indian Vedic symbols. There's indication that there are realms in which space is not limited, but time is. And that, in fact, is what we see in quantum mechanics. When you make a measurement, the measurement is actually coming from a realm in which time is present, but there is no space, because as we saw with quantum entanglement, the information can travel faster than light. All right, they have a symbol that represents an area, a realm in which there is only time and there is no space. So this is the so-called angelic realm, because the angels can travel from one point in space to another with no loss of time. The other symbol represents a region in which there is no space or time, and that's the space of the divine, the eternal, neither limited by space or time. Okay, let's gather everything together. The alpha model, which means absolute lab frame, and fluid ether, is the model that I've adopted based on my own research and the research of Hildegard and of other people like the Russians. And here is my basic conclusions. I actually wrote a document called the Alpha Challenge. I offered $100 to anyone who could disprove what I put in the document, and I didn't get any responses. So either no one could refute it, or most likely nobody saw it. All right, the alpha model restores the biblical geostatism. That is, that the Earth is at rest is confirmed by the alpha model, and heliocentrism is refuted. Modern physics has already refuted heliocentrism, so it makes no sense for people to argue that the sun is at the center of the universe, because no one believes that in mainstream. They all believe in acentrism, that there is no center to the universe, that any location is as good as any others. The absolute lab frame is used for dynamic predictions for both mechanics and electromagnetic theory. Remember that measurements apply to kinematics, predictions apply to dynamics. So whenever you apply the laws of physics, you must use the Earth frame. You must use the lab frame. The ether reference frame must be used for electromagnetic calculations. So we see that the speed of light must first know what the speed of ether is, v, and we don't know what the upper limit is for v. No one has measured that. But we must know the speed of the ether in order to add the speed of light c, which is constant, in order to determine the speed of light. The alpha model promotes genesis and rejects Big Bang cosmology. You must always make kinematics and dynamics explicit whenever you have a discussion with mainstream people. That means you must emphasize that whatever you're talking about is either measurement or predictions, but you can't confuse the two. That's what Einstein did in his 1905 paper. He didn't distinguish between kinematics and dynamics. Remember that relativity is true, but only for kinematics. Relativity is not true for dynamics. The 1925 Miller results showed, which is a follow-up for the original Michelson-Morley experiment, it showed that the ether is actually about 5 kilometers per second in amplitude. We saw that the ether varies either with day or with year. So there are two different cycles in the ether. And we saw that the source of the ether is the sky, just as Hildegard modeled. Now, there's a lot of talk about what is absolute. Earth was thought to be absolute by Ptolemy, Scripture and Alpha, and by Tycho Brahe. So the Earth was thought to be absolute by Ptolemy, which is 2,000 years ago, and by Alpha, which is my personal acronym for the model that I use. Copernicus and Galileo, of course, they believed that the sun was absolute. Kepler and GPS think that the stars are absolute. Remember that GPS, the error of GPS is in using the ECI system. That is not the reference frame that we use or that we observe. It would lead to tremendous contradictions in the motion of the sun and the moon. And it was even demonstrated by a film, The Earth Stood Still. Newton said that space and time are absolute, but he didn't tell us where. Where should I put the observer in order to make measurements in your absolute frame? Lorentz thought there was an ether, but what was his mistake? He thought the ether was rigid, solid. It's not. Well, part of it, the part that rotates with the stars is solid, but we see that the ether winds and the other things that we've discussed indicate that ether is a moving fluid. Einstein said that light speed is absolute, and we see that that was false. Astronomer George Ellis thought that the CMB source of the dipole was the center of the universe, but that's not true. Mainstream believes that basically nothing is absolute. The cosmological principle says that every place in the universe is the same as every other place. The universal expansion of the Big Bang, well, we've disproved that, so that's not absolute. The steady state model says that infinity is the absolute, but there is no physical infinity, so that can't be true. Here are some philosophical properties that that you've seen before from Austin's previous videos. I agree with all of these, but there are parts that have to be further described. All right, we have now the conclusion, and last but not least is the consideration of the flat Earth model. In mythology, it is told that the goddesses were having a party when one of them threw an apple into the middle of them, and the apple said Callisti, which is Greek for to the fairest. And that caused chaos, of course. That was a disturbance of the calm that was caused by this apple that was thrown into the middle of the goddesses. Well, my opinion of flat Earth is basically that it hasn't been on my radar. It really hasn't been something that anybody pointed to me, at least not recently, as being something that I should consider. I know that the consideration of the flat Earth was done by some people who addressed it by doing the research, which I haven't done. One of the persons I can recommend is Bob Sungenis. I know that he is he's written a book on flat Earth, and I think he's done a debate on flat Earth. So he would be the one to discuss flat Earth with. The importance of flat Earth, I basically have to consider if I were at Heaven's Gate, would St. Peter come and say, "Get out of line, you're a globalist, you're going to hell because you believe in a flat Earth"? Well, I don't believe that. So the importance of flat Earth has to be considered in terms of what other things I consider to be important. But like I said, Bob Sungenis is probably the best reference that I know of for discussing flat Earth. And I think if we just wrap that up with a poem from the Civil War, the poet Lowell described the chaotic conditions that existed in the Civil War time. And among other things, he said, "Truth is forever on the scaffold and lies are forever on the throne. And we must upward still and onward who would keep abreast of truth." So that's as true today as it was in the Civil War time. We have truth forever on the scaffold, at least in science, and we seem to have lies forever on the throne. I think that is enough for the part 2 presentation. And so I'd like to pass it back to Austin and Alan.
Very cool, brother. I'll add you in now. There you go. Thank you so much for your presentation, man. Very edifying and intriguing.
It represents about 3 decades of examination of science and looking at what's true and what isn't, using the criteria that I explained.
Yeah, you certainly put in the work, man, and it's great that you laid everything out. Your takes on it are super interesting, man, because we don't really get people to that come on and talk about this kind of stuff. So super fortunate to have you on. We're definitely going to be getting into follow-ups and stuff. How are you on time? Do you have time to talk about a couple of slides?
Oh yeah,
go over
yeah,
some
sure.
stuff?
I've got 3:15, so yeah, I've got time.
Okay, cool. Do you have do you have anything, Austin, or any questions or anything? Like,
I can. I think a couple people wanted to ask him a question. If you wanted, if I could read those off real fast.
Yep.
Okay, so let's start with the first one. Someone said earlier, when he said the hiker doesn't feel force, how come when driving at 70 miles per hour on the motorway and a car drives past really fast and close, I can feel my car pull to the side? I'm not really sure what that's in relation to.
Yeah, that's really not the same subject, but the answer to the question is it's the Bernoulli effect. when the cars pass, it creates a column of air that moves quickly between. It increases the speed of the air between the cars. And what Bernoulli predicts is that wherever the speed increases, the pressure will drop. And so that causes the two cars to be forced together. That is a force inward on both cars. And that's something different from the inertial force that I discussed as part of the hiker slide.
Perfect. All right. Next question. Doctor, in your opinion, if we are the center, how do we navigate the institutions with such profound implications? Are the unintended consequences dangerous?
I don't know what you mean by navigate the institutions.
I guess he means like the universities and the institutional scientism.
Oh, you mean how do we overcome mainstream?
Pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's difficult to do because how do you learn science? You learn it from textbooks. Who write the textbooks? Well, basically, all of the graduates from the mainstream universities, the Ivy League. You get your science information in modern times. You can get it from the internet. You can get it from TV. There are other sources. But ultimately, all of the content is written by mainstream. Another source you might consider is Wikipedia, which I call Wackipedia. And that is an interesting setup. I tried to correct something. I think it was the Sagnac effect. So I read it in Wiki, and I contacted them and I said, I want to change some of the content. Well, it seems that there are gatekeepers, okay, which detect anyone who's trying to change the what's published, and you get shunted off to a trial. Basically, you have to present your evidence to a group of mainstream. So this sounds like a peer review, except the peers are all mainstream thinkers. That wouldn't be bad if they were open-minded, but they're not. They only believe what they already believe, but which is okay, but they don't accept evidence that contradicts it. So there's many forces that are present that are creating mainstream images, and truth is now being suppressed, actually, by the tremendous influence that science media has. And as far as how we can correct that, only by doing the things like you're doing, Austin, by providing information on the internet in a way that is appealing to, let's say, the modern audience. And the content is not only good, but the presentation, the videos are well done, animations, and so on. So what you're doing is part of what might be called a dissident revolution. Oh, by the way, dissident, I don't think I defined for you. Dissident means to be without a seat. Dissident. To be seatless means you're not at the same seat with the elite at the table of information and of distribution of information. So dissident means you have no seat at their table. And that's exactly what we have. We aren't heard. So publishing books is another way of doing it, but books are sort of passé with the modern group. Books are sources for older people, but the younger people like to see videos and audio as opposed to reading. So I would say keep doing what you're doing and try and encourage other people to do the same.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the kind words, brother. Yeah, I kind of agree. I think that that's it, I mean, it's getting to where even that is being suppressed, right? Like even online content. But yeah, thank you for the kind words. I'm gonna do all that I can. Um, okay, very good answer there. Okay, we have another one. Robert, in the last presentation, you mentioned a suggested modification to Wang's experiment, wherein the upward distance from the disk to the sensor could be adjusted. Can you expound upon what this would show?
Yeah, that was the Dufour-Prunier, not Wang. The distance from the spinning disk, the vertical distance above the spinning disk. I suggested that that be increased. In fact, I know what I said, that I suggested it to Wang that he do it with his experiment, but he said no, he wasn't going to repeat it. Anyway, the reason I said that increasing the height of the fiber optic cable above it doesn't matter, the spinning rotor or the linear conveyor. In either case, you have moving ether, and you can detect that. The question is, how far from the source, from the moving object, do you have to be? Does ether obey the inverse square law? Does it fall off with 1 over r or 1 over r squared or something different? It definitely has to decrease because it can't spread through the universe because it would have been detected. So it must be local. So that's what I'm referring to. Try and increase the height so you learn at what's the functional dependence of distance from the source of the ether, and that's what I meant. 4 centimeters was not enough, which was Dufour and Prunier.
Nice.
Yeah, at 4 centimeters, they got the full translational effect. So yeah, like seeing that drop off point would allow you to determine, like, how high space is, for example, or something like that. Stuff like that.
Yeah, you'd want to find at least where it starts to drop off.
Yeah.
All right, so that you can draw a graph and find out what kind of a law this is obeying.
So when you mentioned, I mean, if you're not comfortable answering or divulging any of this, that's totally cool. But you mentioned that you spoke to Wang. Kind of, if you're comfortable, like what is kind of his position or reaction? Like, what was his experience once he did this test, and maybe why was he discouraged, or why would he be discouraged from kind of replicating it and further, exploring it? Again, like if you don't want to divulge anything like that, that's fine. But I'm just kind of curious as to why he didn't do follow ups or what his take is, maybe.
Yeah, okay. Let me tell you how I contacted him. Um, in his paper, it said he's located at St. Cloud University. So I went to the internet and looked up the faculty and got his phone number. So that's how I contacted him. And when I talked to him, I explained that I was very much in favor of the results that he obtained. I said they are very important and they deserve a much wider audience because they conflict with special relativity. And I think when I said that, he basically clammed up. He basically said, "No, I'm not doing any more experiments." I said, "But this is important. I mean, you're showing that relativity, the speed of light is not constant, and you're supporting the Sagnac effect, which showed the same thing." But it was a brief conversation, Austin. I didn't, he basically knew that I was challenging relativity, and he didn't want to go down that path.
Okay, not too much of a surprise.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, we got a couple more here. We have Witsit. Is it possible relativity is used to confuse or manipulate our adversaries, and this explains the institutional resistance to unorthodox ideas? Frankly, I don't really follow your question. I'm not sure who what adversaries you're referring to. Relativity was just a way to keep the model in place pretty simply, and then everyone's conformed to it. No one can come up with an alternative, so it stays in place. It's pretty much. I'm not really sure who you're referring to as adversary. Okay, we got another question for you here. Did I understand correctly that they made up an ad hoc arbitrary reference frame to explain GPS clocks?
Yeah, basically. If you want to go into the details, GPS was built by engineers, not by physicists. If they claim that they're using theory to explain how GPS works, well, no, that's false. You know, engineers, different from, and I was an engineer for 20 years at least, software engineer. Engineers get paid not on theory, but on delivery of a working product on time. Okay, so that's all they care about. They don't care if 2 + 2 = 4 or 2 + 2 = 5. Whatever they need to make the system work, they will do it. So the way GPS evolved, actually, if you read this, and it's on the internet, they basically fiddled with different ways of detecting what is the distance to a satellite. Because once you have that, then you can use that to locate any ground transmitter that's transmitting to the ground station, and you can communicate the location through the connection with the satellite. So they fiddled with this, and I think I mentioned Ron Hatch was one of my colleagues. He recently died, but he worked on the GPS system, and he revealed that basically they just kept fiddling with it until it worked, and then they had to figure out what did they do that made it work. And they said, well, we can't use Aether because nobody believes in Aether, at least none of the mainstream people they're working with. So let's see if a different reference frame can be used. So they said, well, let's consider that the GPS system is in the ECI system, the one where the Earth and the stars are not rotating. And they found that that worked. And I can explain why that worked, because if you use the ECI system instead of the ECEF, the lab frame, what you're doing is saying, I'm going to take the ether that actually rotates around the Earth, and I'm going to make it stationary. Well, if you do that, the speed of light is no longer c plus v, it's just c. In other words, they put themselves in a reference frame which rotates with the ether. That's what I'm saying. And if you do that, then you get the correct results. But that's not the world in which we observe. We don't see the sun on one side of the Earth for 6 months, and then on the other side for 6 months. And all of these would be true if we really lived in the ECI system. Now, there's a lot of details, of course, but that's the basic gist. GPS was built by engineers, not physicists. The ECI system works because it assumes that the ether is at rest, which is what you do when you say the stars are not moving. And that's the explanation that I would give without going into details of what was the history of GPS. It's not a confirmation of relativity, definitely not.
Yeah, isn't it funny that that's actually what people say too? They actually say GPS is evidence for relativity.
Well, you can't blame people, Austin, because they're just repeating what the media tells them. And
I can blame them for doing that though.
Blame them a little bit.
Yeah, for not. I blame them for not thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So real quick, can I get into some details on the transformations on GPS? Right. So Are you familiar with how they say that the velocity of the speed of light is proportional to the velocity of the receiver? Like there's a delay. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, these are all of the original theories that were used to try to explain the optics experiment,
Yeah.
measuring the speed of light. Yeah.
So what you were saying with the transformation, the way that they would cut that off in the transformation, they would be able to derive the velocity of the receiver and then like tell everyone or like not ascribe it to the fact that they just derived it because it's proportional to the medium, that they were moving through, right?
Hmm.
Like that just blew my mind because that's crazy. I didn't fully understand how it worked, and I had a slight misunderstanding on the ECI frame. And what you just said, just like it's over. That's how they do it. They just because I was looking at the new documents because they used to actually say in like the 1994 documents that there was a Doppler frequency shift, which is basically them saying that the speed of light changes. But then they turned around in the new documents and they have like a diagram and show this stuff, and they're just like they just show that they have the velocity of the receiver somehow. And I'm like, okay, well, how are they inserting that into their corrections if they without admitting that it's due to that proportional relationship, and that's it. It's from the it's from that ECI transfer.
Hmm. Well, the key to understanding is ether. If you don't have that, speed of light is c plus v. If you don't have that as your fundamental working model, then you're going to have conflicts with all of the optical experiments. They tried to use models where it was like firing a gun from a train, right? And trying to predict what the speed was and whether Galilean relativity was right or whether Einstein was right. It it basically comes down to if you say that the Earth is the center of the universe, or what I would more precisely, I would say that the Earth is at rest in the universe. If you say that, then you have to explain what Newton's laws normally explain as due to the rotation of the objects in the solar system. So once you become a geocentrist, you also must become an etherist. You also must believe, in order to make logical sense of the laws of physics, you must use ether once you decide that the Earth is at rest. And so you could basically say optical experiments that don't include ether are not going to be successful.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue to this last super chat here. It says, "Can you explain the ether in simple terms, please?" I know.
If I knew exactly what it was, yeah, I can tell you what it does. All right,
Right.
I can tell you that. If you want a philosophical description, this would go back not just to Aquinas but to Aristotle. The ether is the fifth substance. Remember, in the Hildegard model, we had earth, air, fire, water. We also had ether. All right. So ether was included in the original concept of what were the parts of the universe, what was a physical object made of. And so this is uh, a direction that we should continue to go in.
Right, and anyone that's not familiar, Aristotle, he names the elements and he includes ether as being the primary element, basically.
Yeah, the philosophical description of ether is basically probably based on hylomorphism. Okay, that's a branch of philosophy started by Aristotle that says that there are two elements in change. Whenever anything changes, it can be explained as in terms of two things: a matter, material, which is going to be changed, and form, which gives all of the possibilities of changing. Okay, so for example, if you have a stone and you say, okay, I want to get blood from a stone, well, the form of a stone does not include the possibility of bleeding. So this model says that we can break change down to the transition of matter from one state to another by accepting a form. Now, it is possible, and this is discussed in philosophical circles, that model for matter could be what we call ether. Ether is basically, if we say it's everywhere, then it means it's inside atoms. Everything is made of ether. There's no place where there is no ether. And if that's true, it seems to match Aristotle's definition of matter and Aquinas. So you start getting into philosophy. What is there that everything is made of, but itself is not made of anything?
Yeah. Or anything in the terms of like material world of matter, energy. Like I think even Tesla agreed with this, right? Tesla said it is the primary substance and everything else is derived of it. And he said, I think we could even be comfortable in saying that static electricity is the ether under stress, and magnetism electricity is the ether in motion, and that it's a very tenuous primary substance. Everything comes from it. And yeah, so when people ask me this all the time, it's like, well, look, I'm just acknowledging the logical antecedent for a lot of this evidence. Like logically, this is a requirement for what we see, whether that be the Casimir effect, vacuum energy, whatever you want to call it, the ether drift measurements and stuff like that. As to exactly what it is, I mean, I think it's not confined to the material world. It's non-Cartesian. I don't think we could ever fully understand it. I define it as like a primary substrate that's fluid-like, and then we really just get right into what like its effects or characteristics, right? That's really all we end up discussing. But yeah, anyway, that is a tough question. People think that you should just be able to give them some like sufficient, simple answer, and it's not how it works.
No, the irony is that it is the simplest substance in the world is ether, but that means, how do you describe it? What properties does it have? It doesn't. It confirms properties on other things that we perceive. So anything we perceive with the senses is the result of some change in ether.
Right.
You could also say, we know that the stars are rotating in what appears to be a solid ether. The Bible says God created the firmament on the second day, and he inserted it between the water above and the water below. Well, that's where we live, between the surface of the earth and wherever the stars end. That's the firmament, and that's rotating. It's like the stars are embedded in a piece of metal, a metal that we can't see. And yet we know from the Hildegard model and from direct measurements with experiments, we know that the ether can flow, that there's an ether wind. And should we say that the ether is like water, it has different phases? Or should we say that we're using ether in too general a way, that there are really different types of things that we're calling ether that should have different names because they're substantially different?
Yeah, I don't know, right? I think that's what quantum field theory would say, right? Like quantum field theory wants to name every little characteristic of the ether as some individual corporeal thing or whatever. And I think that's where they're messing up. I mean, they basically just say ether without saying ether. I mean, to me, yeah, it is basically a modality of water. I think it may be somewhat like a superfluid because whatever the stuff moving in the sky isn't really suffering from any type of resistance or viscosity or whatever. I don't know what it is, but I think it is just the primary substance, everything we see. So like basically, like I said, I think they're just overly compartmentalizing characteristics of the ether and naming it different things. And do you know what's so crazy, man? When I first started looking at this, I'm like, oh, even Newton explained this. Like Newton proposed the idea of,
Oh yeah.
like in detail about the ether and how it would, what the properties it would have to have and stuff. And they just, you'll never hear that. You'll never hear about any of this, or how Einstein flip-flopped when he put out GR and he's like, oh, there has to be an ether, right? Like you never hear these things. And it's weird. And I that's why I keep trying to tell people is the ether. So it didn't matter whichever way you go. If you're like, okay, we have to acknowledge the Earth's at rest, there's an ether. If you have to acknowledge there's an ether, the Earth's at rest, right? They're joined at the hip, and that's why they can't acknowledge it. Now, I will say my chat's obviously really pressing me to acknowledge the flat Earth thing, but I'm trying to explain to them that. So to kind of give you my take on this, where you mentioned like, well, if you go up to heaven, right, are they going to be like, get out of here, you globalists, right? And no, I don't think so. But I do think we are supposed to always try to figure out, what's going on and seek truth and stuff like that. And when it comes to flat Earth, which I had Robert on my show, we had like a very good conversation. I don't know if you've seen that. And then at the end, we kind of agreed that we'll do a flat Earth debate at some point in the future. And I think that would be cool as long as we can keep our cool, because I like him. I don't like it being divisive or whatever. But when you find out that the Earth is not what they told us that it is, you find out that it's at rest, and then that means it's in the center. And I think that's probably the biggest thing you find out, because they've told people that it's this tiny speck of dust, it's insignificant, you're insignificant, has no special or unique position. And all of a sudden, if it's in the center, someone put it there, right? It's very important philosophically, and I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways of flat Earth is that. And that's why I have no problem isolating that part of the conversation, having people on, not talking about the rest of it, because it is arguably the most important thing. It points to the creator. I think it's very important. That's actually why I do all this, is I felt led to do that. There are some implications of if it is a plane as well, right? Is there more land? Is this place bigger than we think it is? Which it would be a very significant, revelation. Like, if we actually can't go out past 60 south latitude freely, I mean, maybe there's more land. And for me, I think now I could go through the whole thing, right? I mean, microwave transmissions, radio transmissions over 40 megahertz, et cetera, et cetera. We refuted the claim that it's a sphere pretty solidly. But one of the biggest parts of it, and the reason that like no one can intimidate me away from talking about it, is I think it introduces a theory of everything. I think when you have a stationary Earth in a central position, and then you have an ether, and you have a plane, now you have a torus field geometry from the small to the big. It's the theory of everything. All things fall within that geometry, right? And yeah, I think that would just progress. That would progress physics so much. If we can move towards understanding everything's a modality of ether, everything is intrinsically electromagnetic, and that there is a theory of everything. It's the ether, and with that same geometry from the small to the big, I mean, it would change the world. It would change the world, in my opinion. We should have way better technology and free energy and stuff like that. So there's to address it, because I know the chat really wanted me to. I would happily discuss this with Robert, because I do respect him a lot. And yeah, it is not a globe. It is not a globe. We tested it, man. It would be much easier for me to not take that position, obviously. But yeah, so there's my kind of take on that. And I respect you for saying that you haven't really looked into it, and so it's not like you're ridiculing someone for thinking it or acting like they're stupid or whatever. And so there is my response to the chat, so they'll chill out.
Okay, let me just say that I've been wrong before. I was an evolutionist because that's what I was taught in school. I was a heliocentrist, a Copernican, because that's what I was taught in school. I did believe that there was no ether, because that's what I was taught. So I believed in things, Austin, because I didn't know any better. I came out of school believing what I had been taught and doing my own research, which is what you apparently have done. I came to different conclusions than mainstream. So I've been wrong before, and I'm open to discussions. But like I said, I haven't done the research. It hasn't been, the focus of my attention. And Bobson-Jenis has addressed this, has done the research, and he's the go-to guy, I would say.
Yeah, so I think we need to have I think him and I need to have a discussion. Like I think we had a very edifying, productive, fruitful conversation about geocentrism, as it were coined, and I think we need to talk about it. I've heard his arguments against it, and they're not compelling, respectfully, but I will say this is where I'm at, right? I get that he's in a tricky situation, even if he were to start to see some validity in flat Earth, right? Because in 2002, he starts researching this and he starts going against everyone, getting attacked. He fought so hard to get this truth out there, and he made one of the best documentaries ever, right? And he kind of just undermines that if he comes talking about flat Earth in the way that people hear that. He already has to deal with that. And it's the same thing for my friends that are former MDs that now are like, oh no, germ theory, what they're telling us about our body and sickness and illness isn't true or whatever. If they come out and start talking about flat Earth, well, it just credits their other work, right? And so I empathize with that. And I'm not going to attribute any type of intention to it. I think he believes that it is in fact a sphere, but I will say it's very interesting though when you look at it, understanding it's not a sphere, it's a plane. You have the vortex in the magnetic field, and that's the ether drift. The vortex is literally there's a torus field. We live on the plane, and then there is a vortex in the torus field that we're detecting, and we're going higher above. So I find that interesting. I think there are tests that we can get together and do to actually determine one or the other, whether that be actually go to the south and take out these interferometers. We should do tests further out south with these interferometry tests. And so, yeah, anyway, that's kind of my position. I would love to have a conversation with him. I have an experience where I get along with someone so well, or this pulls out a different side of people sometimes. Like people get very angry about it, and I don't want that to happen. But yeah, if that's who you're calling on, throw him in the game. The way he phrased it is, yeah, well, we'll set it up in the future, and you bring your guns, I'll bring my guns, and we'll duke it out. And I'm like, okay, so sounds good. So hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of debates because, first of all, some of them that I've seen are personality contests. And other ones where you just violate all of the rules by not just ad hominem arguments, but just ignoring the evidence that the other guy has presented and just say, well, here's what I want to promote. Well, you didn't answer the question that was raised before you, So I much prefer things that are documented, where you can examine things and everything isn't presented on the fly. Anyway, that's in general, I don't like debates. Discussions, I love. Debates, no.
Yeah, I get that for sure. And it's certainly in this topic, it's just they're rarely fruitful. People get so out of hand. Like, yeah, just like you said, they won't even respond to what was said. So I don't know. I would rather just have a discussion with Robert, right? That's when I had him on earlier. We just discussed this stuff.
Mhm.
What about this? Do you have anything? I know you kind of mentioned a slight modification of a previous test earlier. Like, do you have anything you would like to see done? And I think I can help with that. I think we're about to launch back up FE Core or some variation of that, where we do tests and we have its field engineers. And yeah, do you have any even specific to further understanding the ether or how the drift works or anything? Do you maybe have any ideas of tests that could be done or replications that we can do of these previous tests? Or if you don't right now, I mean, just I'm open to hearing anything you say and trying to make it happen.
Well, I think we have plenty of tests of the ether. I think that we need to pay more attention to the Russian contribution, like Atsukovsky's chart, which summarizes the results of their tests. So we're talking about ether. Well, we do know some of the properties of ether, if we consider that the Russian tests are correct. And as I pointed out on the slide, there's tremendous range. The ether is very thin, and yet it has tremendous pressure. All of these are contrary to what we experience with real physical objects. So to answer your question, the extension, the vertical extension of the Dufour-Prunier experiment, that would be one. I'd probably have to think of others, but I think there's plenty of things that I put on the slides that confirm the ether. I think we should look for more research into what the Russians are doing. Maybe more people read the Adosovsky paper. Personally, what I would like to do is try to respond to these videos that are being flooding the internet of so-called science experts who are mainstream, promoting this is the reason why something is true. They're going through a lot of the things that I covered on the slides, and I showed that it was false. So being able to respond in like manner with videos that are directed at what's already published. Wiki you can't break because they have control of the access. They have the gatekeepers. So there's no way you can change Wiki. In fact, did you know that the original founder of Wiki quit because they were taking over, mainstream was taking over the content of Wiki?
I did not know that.
Yeah, and well, he was concerned with the politics, right? The way they give the biography and of different people, and they were slanted liberal.
Yeah.
So so he quit. He is the founder of Wiki, and he has to quit because he's lost control of his own program.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. If you don't fit the status quo, they bury you on that website.
Yeah, yeah. Just try to change something, and it's like you're going to court and you've been sued. you have to defend yourself, and it's strung out. So eventually you say, why should I spend time doing this?
Right. And they're selective about what they allow to be changed anyway.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's not just physics and science, but actually they don't change the basic experiments. Okay, they can't because those are documented. But the interpretation of the experiments, they definitely tamper with, and it's always the mainstream slant.
Exactly. Just go look up Michelson-Morley's perfect example. They'll tell you disprove the ether. And just to give a visualization as to what I was talking about, if you, I don't know, can you see that?
No, I'm still in the
Okay. It's all good. No worries.
single screen.
Yeah, it's totally fine. I was just showing when you take the magnetic flux data of the Earth and you put it on a plane, it creates this giant vortex and it matches the Farrell cell image of a magnetic field. But anyway, I just wanted to show you the visualization. Alan, what's up, brother? You got some stuff you want to throw at him while we have the guest here?
Yeah, I had a question from someone. They wanted me to ask you about four vectors and specifically energy and momentum four vectors used in special relativity. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, the basis of a four vector is that you can unify space and time. Okay, that you can take time and multiply it by the speed of light, and you get the dimensions of distance. So now you have something which dimensionally is space, but what does it represent in the real world? Nothing. There's no direction I can point to and say that's the CT direction. So the so-called space-time interval is a mathematical creation which doesn't have a physical connection. It isn't represented in the real world. I could just as well take the distances, x, y, z, and divide them by c, and I would get the dimensions of time. Then I would have four-dimensional time. What does that mean? Well, that's just another mathematical trick. So the basic problem is that the concept of unifying space and time is, again, mathematically possible, because you can do basically anything in mathematics, but doesn't correspond to anything that I can physically measure in the real world. And that's basically the answer to that question.
Well said. So basically, just to kind of recap, it just creates a blank slate for a coordinate system where you can fit anything into it and then apply other abstract mathematics to conform the coordinate system to meet your measuring stick, which is the speed of light.
Yeah, the one who started this was Minkowski, who
Yep.
created the space-time diagram. And you represent the speed of light as a diagonal line, which divides space into space that's accessible, real space, and then a space where you can't get to because you'd have to travel faster than light. Well, we know that that model collapses if I include ether, because now ether can change the diagonal line, the boundary between what's real and what's imaginary. And so right from the beginning, ether would put an end to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got a quick graphic up for the audience. So I could show them the Minkowski diagram here. So this light cone here was invented to make all transformations covariant as long as as long as you don't go faster than the speed of light or slower. So like it's like it's so that it doesn't violate causality. So anything's automatically covariant. So this hyperbolic scaling here that you see in this diagram, the faster you're moving, the more distance and the more time contract proportionally to make the transformation symmetrical. That's what the Rent symmetry is, right? So they have to time and space have to contract proportionally. So they just map the time axis perpendicular to the direction of motion. And then that's all they're doing. So that's what that graph represents right there. So the faster you go, the more the contracting is, and it scales hyperbolically all the way to the speed of light, where you reach the end of the cone at infinity or whatever, right?
Is that for me?
No, that was just for a recap and to show everyone the diagram what you were talking about.
Okay, I'm still on end of part 2. I didn't get back. I didn't change the screen.
Oh, you're good. If you click on your StreamYard tab, you can see us now. You can tab out of the presentation.
Okay.
Let me read this to you. Thank you for your time and all you share, Dr. Bennett. Your attitude, knowledge, faith, and demeanor is inspiring and uplifting. Run Boston Bears.
Is that from my mother?
Shout out to Ron Boston Bear. He has that effect. He's a positive energy, dude.
Nicest guy ever.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for the super chat, brother.
Stop sharing. Is that what I need?
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Stop sharing. Okay, I still have the slideshow.
Click on in your Chrome tab, click on the tab that says StreamYard, and it should take you to us.
Yes.
There we go. Cool.
Nice.
All right. Awesome.
Well, I'm going to show you what I was showing you earlier. You see, this is the magnetic flux data of the Earth on a plane. You see how it matches the Ferrel cell image of the magnetic field. And then in the bottom right there, that white line is the plane of inertia or block domain wall. And so from my understanding, right, we perceive this top half of the magnetic field, it vortexes around, and that's why that data looks like that. I mean, it's actually eerily similar. So just to get an idea of what I think. And I think that it's going to be up to us. It's going to be up to people that have broken away from the mainstream indoctrination camps called universities. And we'll have to start working together to kind of figure out how to progress physics. It seems like it's that time in history where literally our only option is to kind of congregate outside of the system. And, it's not going to be easy, right? Because they have unlimited funding and we don't at all. But yeah, so that's kind of why I'm so motivated about it. I certainly don't think I know all the answers or anything even close, but I think that we need to figure it out. I think we need to try to figure it out. The true nature of this place. We've clearly been misled.
Yeah. The options are limited, especially when you have little money. But this is what turns me on. This is what my interest is basically focused on. And as far as I know, my research has indicated that the mainstream way of thinking is not correct, and I'd like to do something about it.
Same. And that's why I'm so glad that you came on, because there's not enough people like you, man. There's really not. There's not enough people that will come out and speak so boldly, certainly with any type of credentials or reputation. So we need more people like you, man. We need you to get in the ears of some of these other guys.
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm retired, and so the beauty of that is that I don't owe allegiance to anyone. I can't be fired. I'm not working, so you can speak freely. And I guess you have to wait until you're either financially independent or you're retired before you can really say what you think, because it's true that if you didn't follow the mainstream thinking when I was teaching or when I was working, I may not have been fired, but I wouldn't have been. Other upper positions would not have been open to me. So
Yeah, that's just disgusting, man. Because what I use Einstein as an example. Okay, so obviously I consider Einstein basically a quack. He didn't come up with anything on his own. He stole it. Even his space-time geometry, he stole from Henri Poincaré. He didn't even come up with that. He stole everything, and he made paradoxical, nonsensical claims. Doesn't even really cover the dynamics and et cetera, et cetera. Go on and on about what's wrong with Einstein, right? Individually, personally, and intellectually. But all that aside, relativity was adopted because it was out of necessity. But I point this out to people because I'm like, okay, look, I get it. You believe in the mainstream narrative or whatever. But you realize that when Einstein went to the Royal Society and he tried to present his idea, he got laughed out of the room. They're like, this guy's trying to say Newton's wrong and that there's no ether. What a crazy person. He got laughed out of the room. So in this scenario, now properly so, obviously, but I'm saying in the scenario that he is correct, like the mainstream says, you see how it would be a problem or it would be a mistake to just immediately ridicule and neglect someone else that's presenting something outside of the mainstream. Even within this paradigm, the main theory was originally rejected, right? And it wasn't part of the majority position. And this has always happened. It's like every time someone makes any progression, now that is only progression in the sense of if we cling on to the heliocentric model, this is the only way out. So it was progression in that sense, right? But it just blows my mind that people don't see that in order to ever progress, someone's going to have to come outside and bring up something that has nothing to do with the mainstream while they're sitting here with dark matter and dark energy and Hubble tension and the flatness problem, all this crazy stuff. I mean, just endless, right? If there's ever a hope to fix those problems, then obviously someone's going to have to introduce something not currently accepted by consensus. So it blows my mind. Is this just like a thing that happens throughout all history? People can't use logic to put that together. I don't. It's frustrating, man.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's repeating history, repeating itself, and people basically are using a herd instinct. They're following the leader. They're not challenging things that should be challenged. I have to admit, I did that in my earlier years. Went along to get along, but now I have the luxury of sitting back and saying, well, is all these things I believe, are they really true? And as I've indicated in the talk, as far as the physics is concerned, there's whole areas that are false, and I would like to correct it, obviously, but well, we already talked about the ways that it could be done with
Yeah.
modern technology. You got to take advantage of that. And you're doing that. But you also have the advantage of being young and being open to new ideas. The older you get, the more set in concrete you'll become. So
Yeah.
that's another factor.
Yeah, but look at you. Here you are. The only realistic thing I've been able to come up with that would actually shake it up on some major level, meaning like the currently accepted paradigm of physics or whatever, is to get on camera interactions with some of these bigger names. So, like sitting down with even these scientific communicators or, any of the bigger names right now, having some type of conversation broadcasted to the masses, or getting on a Joe Rogan caliber platform,
Yeah.
maybe not that specific one, but just something that's that big. It's really the only way, because I will tell you, my channel is heavily censored. And, like the third video I ever posted got deleted. Immediately I had a strike. Super censored. I have subs removed from me. You get unnotified, all of that. And I don't even talk about the other stuff now, right? Like I go to other platforms. So we're gonna have to strategize something. I'm trying to come up with a few ideas, but it is kind of frustrating. But I guess all we can do is try. I guess all we can do is try. I mean, like people are like, Austin, why don't you write a book? Austin, why don't you write a paper to be published? I'm like, oh yeah, they're gonna publish my paper. Like what are you talking about? It's so ridiculous. So I wish we could do that. I wish we could all just start writing papers. Like, have you heard of Luca Popov? I heard of him via Robertson Jenis.
Right.
He wrote the the Newtonian neo-Tychonian analysis of planetary motion. And Robert was telling me that he wrote a follow-up paper. So that one got published by the European Journal of Physics. He wrote a follow-up paper that was much more in depth, and they just refused to publish it. And it's where, to this extent, he's basically just stepped away now in like a private practice type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you've heard of him. I like it's sad. It's infuriating. So when someone has the balls to do it, they just get made an example of, right?
Yes, I know Popov through Robertson Jenis. You mentioned Halton Arp. I think that's a good example of someone who got crushed by mainstream. Okay, he examined quasars, all right, and he found, for example, that a quasar, which was supposed to be from the depths of space, high redshift, was actually physically connected with another star system. In other words, there was matter connecting the two, luminous matter, which means the two must be at the same distance, right? Because they're connected. And one had a low redshift and the quasar had a high redshift. And he's pointing these out all over the sky, right? So what happened to him? They said, you can't observe anymore. The observatories are now closed. Well, for an astronomer, that's like a death sentence, right? Because that's his life. He's got to be able to see the stars. And he wound up going to Europe in order to get observatory time. And so that's an example of how you're going to be resisted by the mainstream. What did YouTube toss out your video for? Did they give a reason?
Well, I've had it happen many times. I mean, the first time I started covering, like, it was about war. It was about who's really the common factor behind all the wars, and it was hate speech. And it said I was inciting violence, as I was saying we shouldn't go to war. I've had, obviously, I've been struck for medical misinformation many times over that 3-year period of totalitarianism. When it comes to specifically flat Earth, they can't just outright remove it because it would be too obvious, right? So what they do is they They put the disclaimer on there. They deprioritize you in the algorithms, and they unsub people, and they remove notifications. I've been censored mostly for it. It doesn't matter. They don't really tell you. They just say like, "Oh, hate speech," you know. So yeah, I think I've probably had 10, 15 videos taken down. But what can you do?
But most of them were not science, right?
They were not. No,
Yeah.
no. And I don't think they could. I don't think they could ever do that because it would just be so obvious, right? I mean,
Well, I don't know about that. Yeah.
yeah, maybe you're right because I guess they basically do it in the academic circles.
What the strategy of some people when they get deplatformed, and this is politically in the political world. In other words, they're publishing things that are contrary to the current regime. They build their own platform, but that takes money. You got to be able to avoid YouTube and be able to support your own research and avoid the restrictions that YouTube has. So that there's other channels you can go to, but YouTube is still the main source of information for most people, at least as video is concerned.
Yeah, you know what's crazy when you were talking about Halt and Arp? Like, isn't there like there's like a pair of spiral galaxies like named after him?
Yeah, right.
Like, how are you going to tell that guy he can't use observatories anymore? Insane, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess you just got to fight the good fight, man. You know, I'd rather whenever my children grow up, I can say, you know, we fought the lies, and you know that's all we can do. We'll see what happens. I think the truth will prevail, though. Like I will say, I mean, modern physics is falling down all over the place. So quantum, although we have very like experimentally specific and replicated, you know, evidence or whatever in quantum, interpretation is trash, right? Wave particle duality doesn't make sense. Something can't be the same, two different things at the same time, whatever. And then that's because they tried to cram relativity down its throat, and it still has to do with not acknowledging the ether. So quantum is even held back from the cosmological bias, right? So all of cosmology is falling down, all of quantum is falling down. And so it's just a matter. I mean, that can't last forever, right? You wouldn't think. I guess they can just keep kicking the can down the road and making up some new ad hoc excuse every time. But I look at it like eventually the truth will have to come out. And the truth is clearly that the Earth is not moving. It is in an ether. It is observably in the center. And it is a plane, right? And I don't think that I can hide it forever, but we'll see.
Yeah, this is what we're faced with. The history of physics is basically one of waiting until the ones who oppose you die off. So if you introduce a new paradigm, the first reaction is to be ignored. The second is if you're not ignored and you become popular, to ridicule, to say how stupid your position is. And then the third thing is to accept the paradigm once everyone who opposed it is dead and say that we always believed this. And so this is what we always believed, that we never objected to it. So you have this pride, I guess, right? Pride is what prevents anyone from saying, hey, I made a mistake. Yeah, I was wrong. Like I said, I was wrong in the beginning of my career with a lot of things that I thought were true. But things have changed.
Yeah, that's so funny. I'm trying to remember who broke that down, but it's so crazy, but it's true. We have no need to read. Thank you, gentlemen. God bless, and I'll double it. Thank you, Kevin, for the super chat. Then we have Mike Jones. Thanks, Dr. Bennett, for your time. Would be great if you and Robert Sagenis could come back on together to discuss the Cartesian nature of reality. I think that's a reference to flat Earth.
Well, yeah. we diverge on on ether, I guess. I mean, we both firmly believe in the Bible version of geocentrism. Okay,
Mhm.
we have no problems with that. Bob believes that you can explain the motion of the cosmos using center of mass. In other words, explaining that we're at the center because if you figured out somehow the center of the mass of the universe is located at the Earth, then you could say that yes, from physical principles, that that would prove it. But how would you prove that? You'd have to know the location and the speed of every object, and there's collections of mass. What is it called? The giant wall, the big wall, which is supposedly enormous amounts of galaxies in space, and this creates a gravitational field that affects the solar system. So how would you even calculate what the center of mass of the Earth is? As you know, I'm an etherist. I explain the motion of everything with ether. Ether is like, well, if you see the leaves of a tree move, do you say, the tree is waving its leaves? Well, that would be one explanation. Another is that there's something pushing against the leaf that I can't see. Okay. Well, what's pushing against the leaf is air, which you can't see. Well, the same can be said for ether. There's certain effects on light that ether makes. We can't see the ether, but we can see its effect on light. And the same reasoning is used there as for saying it's not the leaves that are moving themselves, it's the air that's moving it, which we can't see. And yet people can accept that as a reason for the leaves fluttering in a wind, but reject ether. Well, it goes back to the MMX, right? And the lie that there was no ether because there was no difference detected. Like you said, they call it the null result, when it really wasn't zero. It was small, but not zero.
Yeah, and they had to claim that it was the margin of error, and then it's been that margin of error has been repeated hundreds of thousands of times and has a specific preferred direction and altitude relationship. See, to me, I don't know where that went. Where did that go? Put that back over here. Okay, so to me, this makes a lot of sense, and when it comes to everything moving around the central point, I would say that there's a primary mover, which would be the creator, that initially set this place into motion. And I think that, literally everything could just be moving around that central point of energy. I think that we observe the top half of the torus field, the bottom half is underneath us. I don't think we necessarily want to go there either. And I think that this is all surrounded by water. So to me, yeah, there's an ether. There's a movement within the ether, and I think that when the ether is thrown into motion, it creates what we call matter. It creates what we call electricity, magnetism, etc. I agree with Tesla on that. Electricity and magnetism is the ether thrown into motion. So I think this primary mover sets the motion in the ether, and then that actually creates all the phenomena we see in the sky that we call galaxies, we call all this other stuff. I think it's way more dense. I think it's much more local. I think it's a closed system. I think that we live in a giant sphere. But so to me, that's the way I currently explain it. I've had a PhD astronomer I had this discussion with. I sent him the relational mechanics book and stuff. He came back, and his only thing, he was like, well, why doesn't it run out of energy? Like, why doesn't it slow down over time? Or why how does it keep going? Right. And I'm like, well, for one, I don't know what the source is. If it, I didn't want to say, I think that the primary mover may be the creator, and his presence causes everything to move around it. Right. I wasn't going to say that to the PhD astronomer, although I did end up saying it, but I would like, he's like, well, unless you know the mechanism, unless you know the energy, you're no good. I'm like, or your model's no good. I'm like, okay, so first you denied the dynamic equivalence. Now you've come back and conceded that I was right about all dynamic and kinematic equivalence. And your argument is what's the energy? If you don't know, I'm like, well, what's the dark energy? So if you don't know what dark energy is, then it's no good, right? So anyway, that's kind of my long way of saying that's the best I've figured it out so far, is that I think we're in a torus field. I think everything's moving around it through the ether. And because the ether is so tenuous, or it's somewhat super fluid, like it isn't causing resistance and all that stuff is moving around it. And the earth is just in the middle. And since the energy source that moves it is also central in relation to the earth, that's why everything moves around it. I don't buy the center of mass thing either, is what I'm basically saying. I don't buy that at all. I don't believe in Newtonian mechanics at all. I think it's not correct. I think it's useful in some scenarios, but I don't believe I think gravity, quote unquote, is just an emergent property due to the vibrations in the fluid ether. You know, I don't. Yeah, that's where I disagree with Robert staunchly. Right, outside of flat Earth is like really just staking the flag on Newtonian mechanics. It's not my thing.
Yeah, I disagree with the center of mass. You know, I saw a few of your videos, Austin, and to me, the best one was the one where you had a bio. You went over the path to where you were. You went over some of the things that happened to you, and you mentioned that you had this desire to open the Bible and look and see, and you had Ezekiel and Daniel.
Yep.
Now, Ezekiel and Daniel are the only two persons in the Bible who are described walking through heaven. Ezekiel and Daniel, I quoted in the presentation. He's quoted as saying that he sees the Ancient One seated on a throne, and that there's fire coming from the throne. My question was, where does the fire go? What is the destination? We know what the source is, and Hildegard connects that by, remember the 5 spheres surrounding the Earth. Well, the outside sphere is powered by the Ancient One on the throne. So you described your model, and my model, based on Hildegard, is that the Earth is powered by the energy, the infinite energy coming from God the Father, which comes to us after being changed, going through those spheres, and that's how change occurs on Earth. So notice how we have different models, but we can still come to basically the same conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I even agree with that part you added in about the change through. I would say there's 7 layers. I think there's 7 layers. I think that it technically could be a sphere. It's an elongated sphere, 7 layers, a torus field basically, and you could draw a sphere around it. But yeah, there is a pretty extreme overlap there. You know what's funny, man? Even Tesla said that, right? Tesla said that he was more into Eastern, philosophy, but he said that there was the luminiferous ether and the prana, the life-giving force that sets the ether into motion. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty clearly the case, and you can see why that will never be entertained by mainstream physics or anything, right? But yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. I haven't researched that model too much. I would have to really kind of try to sink my teeth in it and see, take the good, leave the bad, if you will.
Yeah, I was reminded of that, that you had spoken of Daniel and Ezekiel. And like I said, those are the only two in the Bible that are described walking through heaven and actually seeing how things work, right? What is the source of the power in the universe? Well, according to that model, we know what it is, at least in symbolic terms, right? In allegorical terms.
And it makes the most sense, right? I mean, yeah, probably the primary mover. Yeah, that's interesting. That was really what started it really changed my whole life, man. That part of my testimony.
Alan, you've been quiet.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah, no, just been hanging out, collecting my thoughts. I had something to follow up with you about. So last presentation you mentioned that you've only seen 2 complete solutions for the perihelion precession with general relativity, and obviously those are kinematic solutions. Like, do no dynamic solutions exist? And what would a dynamic solution look like in general relativity?
Well, you try to solve the general relativity equation. G mu nu equals a constant times T mu nu. G mu nu is the curvature of space, okay, using mathematics, and the T mu nu is the concentration of mass and energy, which causes the space to curve. Okay, I'm just parroting
Right.
what general relativity claims. And I forget your question, Alan.
Oh, two complete solutions. So yeah, they're complete solution then. So for the Schwarzschild metric, they don't
Mhm.
even they don't account for like the mass of Mercury or anything like that. They impose conditions on the sun so that so that they can use its rest mass, because God forbid you use relativistic mass, which is said to exist, so that they can get that exact amount of curvature to make the prediction. Is just I just can't believe anyone believed like how dude, that they got away with this. It's so crazy because it's
Same thing.
obvious
They
that it's just
invoke that.
nothing.
They invoke that as verification of relativity, when literally it
Mm.
doesn't work.
Mhm.
Doesn't work. Like, they have to use imaginary numbers in the denominators of like equation 7 and 8, and they use a massless path, and they don't account for the mass, and then they say, oh, let's manipulate the charge and radiation of the sun, and all this. Like, what? Like, it's so crazy that this is in plain sight.
The biggest objection to the calculation is that you must know the shape of the sun. It must be a perfect sphere. If it's even bulging at the equator slightly, that affects the calculation of the perihelion. And of course, you have to explain, since we know since we know the sun is spinning, okay, why there isn't a bulge. I mean, we have to rely on their testimony that they observe a perfectly spherical sun. All right. Well, if it's even slightly oblate, that will affect the perihelion. So there's things you can leave out and not include in your calculation because they would reject your own conclusion. It's called lying by omission, and that's one strategy that's used. Uh, General relativity itself is totally false. They have this big crisis in mainstream, the the conflict between quantum mechanics, which has a 0 point energy calculated, which is enormously big. Empty space is full of virtual particles, and if you calculate what general relativity calculates for empty space, I think there's a difference in magnitude of 120, which is a 1 with 120 zeros. And that's the difference between two theories that are supposed to be true. Now, it's general relativity that is totally false. Quantum mechanics, I didn't deal with too much, but most of the principles of quantum mechanics are true. And I believe that because quantum mechanics is a view, when we go into the microscopic world, it's a view into another world of in which there's only time and not space. So we have probabilities of things happening rather than being able to predict exactly what happens.
And they're describing and quantifying ether excitations, perturbations, the disturbances within the ether,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's what light is.
Exactly, I agree. Yes, absolutely. Let me read these real fast. I don't want to get behind. Robertson Genus would need to establish perpendicular, horizontal, and vertical planar axes in reality in order to even begin to describe a ball. Reality is Euclidean and can only be described with a Cartesian coordinate system. I would, of course, agree with you on that, and thank you for the $20 super chat. Let's, of course, be respectful. Well, you weren't disrespectful, but let's just pump the brakes before we get there. Thank you for super chat. Teabag and $10 super chat. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Thank you for coming forward on the show and putting out alternative ways of thinking for the masses to digest and consider. Need more people like you.
Well, God only made one so far.
All right. Run Boston Bear again, $20 super chat. One thing to know as you research, the Earth isn't a disk in space. That image was created along with the FE Society to throw people off. The Earth is the land that came out of the water. The firmament and stars are local. Yeah, that's actually my position, is that we're brainwashed to think that the Earth's an object, when Earth in the scriptures actually means land. And the land was brought up out of the water after the Creator hovered over the face of the water, and then He separated the heavenly water from the earthly water. And there's fountains of the deep and water below us, and it's just water, 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 water. We have land coming up out of the water, and then I think the firmament is a literal physical containment that has 7 layers. And I think it may be like plasma, ionized gas. The farther you go, I think you have to have higher frequency to penetrate higher and higher up. And I don't think the Creator would ever let man go into quote unquote space, just like He didn't let them do that in the Tower of Babel. But that's what I think. That's kind of how I see that. That's what he's referencing, is this whole depiction of a disk object being Earth is kind of a deception. That's not what it is. It's more like a realm. It's a water realm, is what I think.
You mentioned men in space. Okay. So we have another issue in science, is the moon landing. Was it real, or was it a Hollywood set production?
Definitely the latter.
If you're interested in my take on that, it has changed. I believed it at the beginning. Number one, my son was born the day they took off for the moon, July 16th, 1969. Okay. And I was born on 4 days after they landed on the moon. Of course, not the same year. So there's sort of a coincidence there in our birth dates with the takeoff to the moon and the landing. So when I first heard about it, I believed all of the things I was seeing, that Armstrong, landed on the moon and his first step for mankind and so on. Then I started seeing on the internet counter arguments that NASA was putting out films that showed bubbles, okay, in what was allegedly pictures of the astronauts on the moon, which were identified as air bubbles. And then there was all of the things about, are the shadows correct? Is there one light source? Are there 2 light sources? And so on. So I said, well, I should investigate this. But then I had a political thought. I was in high school when this was done, when the moonshot was made. And this was a big deal because, as you know, Kennedy responded, the government responded to the Russian threat of being king of space by saying that we would land in the moon in 10 years. And the claim apparently was true, according to the media. But there was such intense competition to go to the moon. You you don't remember it because you're too young, but it was like a day-to-day race to see who could get to the moon. And it was national pride. And so it was a lot of patriotism was involved. So I said, if the moonshot was fake, then the Russians, who had excellent space tracking equipment, would have been able to defy us and promote a disclaimer. They would prove that it was false. So I considered that, and I said, well, that's a reason then that I should consider that the moonshot was real. So now I'm confused. I see more information that NASA has released films which contradict what their claim is, that they're on the moon. But now I hear that, Well, there were training films that NASA did, which were done underwater, so that simulated being in space. And after reading all of that stuff, I said to myself, I'm totally confused now. Did NASA release the films, or is this someone else releasing the film and saying that it's NASA claiming the opposite? So the answer is I'm totally confused. I think that the Russians would have definitely proven that we didn't go to the moon if they had the proof. And now I learned that we did a lot of cooperation with the Russians.
Yep.
We had political differences, but when the Russians and the American astronauts met for the International Space Station, or even before that, politics was put aside. And so the astronauts had a camaraderie that allowed them to talk honestly with each other. And that's why I think that right now that I can't tell what's true and what's not, because is the NASA film being promoted as being on the moon, or is it really done in Hollywood? And now you can't tell. At least I can't. I'm sure you guys have an opinion on the moon landing, but
Yeah.
I'm still uncertain.
Yeah, no worries, man. I'll send you a documentary that someone made. It's called American Moon. It's 3 hours long, but I'll send you the timestamps to it. They go over a lot of the technical aspects of it and a lot of the stuff that they changed, and then like just stuff that they caught on camera. Like for example, there's a scene which is really big for me where like they're in their pressurized system taking off from the moon. There's a rocket engine underneath them, and there's no vibration or sound or anything coming from that like in their thing. Like there's just like all kinds of stuff like that that just doesn't add up like with the physics of it. So I think when you take a look at it with your background, you'll immediately go, "Oh yeah, okay. Well, it was a good run."
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the real question is, yeah, NASA has films, but are they of a Hollywood set or training sessions? And are people saying the training sessions are on the moon? There's where the confusion is. If you show me a film, I don't know if it's being promoted as true or false.
Yeah,
Right. Well,
absolutely.
they do have the films that they specifically claim to be real from the moon, and American Moon breaks it down. So does a funny thing happen on the way to the moon, but American Moon is a really good documentary. I'll say what you find out is that Russia and America clearly work together, and they utilize one another to propagandize their public. Whether that's the Cold War that lasted for 40 years, right, where both governments get to kind of scare their people and propagandize them, or like I found a declassified document through our government that's from Russia, right? And this Russian scientist, it says that he created a methodology to determine the brightness of the firmament and that the approximation method was proven accurate. And then it actually explains that there are different altitudes to the firmament based on your location on the earth, and that he was able to accurately predict the brightness of that firmament based on his zenith position and the altitude above him that zenith was. So when you really started to look into it, Russia knows, America knows, and that's one of the reasons that flat Earth becomes very important. These countries are working together; they're all signed to the Antarctic Treaty, and so that would be my position. Is yeah, it was absolutely all fake. That's why we haven't been in 50 years, right? And no one is ever going to go. But Russia got to tell their public, oh well, we're the first one to send a monkey to the moon. We're the first ones to send a satellite to space, right? And we're the first one to send a satellite to space. We're the first ones to blah, blah, blah. And then America gets to tell their people, we're the first one to land on the moon. And so both get to kind of instill pride into their populace, and I think that it's kind of like this mutually beneficial agreement. I don't think it was real at all. But yeah, if you've never seen a documentary, man, you should definitely check it out because it's pretty eye-opening. American Moon.
Yeah, and the Chinese claim that they landed on the back of the moon. And so,
Of course
so,
they
Yeah.
did.
so we got
Yeah.
everybody. But yeah, the issue I have is I now know that the Russians and Americans at the science level were cooperating almost from the beginning. So my argument that the Russians would have certainly objected if we claimed we landed on the moon and it was really done in Hollywood. Okay, so that was cleared up. But again, I have to know if the film is being claimed to be from NASA, but was actually of their training sessions, not actually on the moon. But those who object to the moon landing claiming that, oh, these are pictures from the moon and NASA is releasing them. And we see the bubbles and we see the fake shadows and everything else.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, right? So like they claim to still train in the pool for the ISS. Except there's
Right.
videos of the astronauts in the pool, and that's the official explanation is that's just training, right?
Right.
We've found bubbles in the official spacewalk video as well, though. We found actual, yeah. And then it kind of goes the same thing for the moon. I think I know what video you may be referring to, and it's just blatantly a studio, and you can actually tell it's yeah. And I don't think that NASA says in any way that that's like officially their footage. For sure they don't say that. But when you break down the footage they do claim is real, you're able to show that there are multiple light sources, the shadows don't match, the horizon's way too close, and that they physically defy physics even in 1/6 gravity multiple times. And it takes really intricate, examination where they slow it down, they break it down, they show you. But yeah, so I think I know what you're talking about, and the official explanation for sure is going to be the one with the moon is not, it's not NASA's footage, or B, it's something like that's just them training. But when you look at the official footage, you can catch them messing up, and so that's kind of where. And of course, I mean, just goes on and on and on. I mean, they came back after landing on the moon and looked like they just had their puppies run over or something. Like they're like the saddest people ever, and then Buzz Aldrin slips up a couple times, basically saying that we didn't go. None of the astronauts have put their hand on the Bible and say that they didn't go or said that they did go for like $5,000 to charity. So yeah, it's super suspect, I will say, at the least. And that's a good time to shamelessly plug. That's why I opened this up. auditnasa.com. We're a little behind, but we are launching back up. I'm actually going to NASA's facilities next week to have a conversation with a few people, including an astronaut. So auditnasa.com, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of some of the questions like what he's bringing up. We want to talk to the astronauts. We want to ask them the specifics. We want the information that we should be given, the evidence we should be given. If you're really going to space and we've given you almost $2 trillion accounting for inflation since you were founded, we have the right to know the answers to this. So yeah, go to auditnasa.com, and then we'll hopefully help get to the bottom of this once and for all, but we'll see.
Yep.
Cool.
Do we have time to touch on relative simultaneity real quick? Okay, so I've heard that. So you know how earlier when you were saying that two observers would observe different length contractions, right? So I've heard that like an argument for this, debacle here is that relative simultaneity explains it through the mechanism of shoot, I forgot. 1 second. Oh, through it, that it's an apparent contraction. It's not real, right? So they use the relative simultaneity to justify that. So they hinge the correctness of the whole theory in justifying the length contraction on relative simultaneity. I've seen some videos popping up where people are trying to put that forward as their argument for justifying the length contraction stuff. Did you have any thoughts on relative simultaneity?
Well, apparent contraction, how do you know when it's real contraction? If it's apparent, they're saying, well, we're looking like through a lens and we're seeing it distorted. Yeah, but there's no lens actually being put between your eyes and the object. So that doesn't explain the contraction. Plus, they use that number, the contracted length, they use that in other formulas. So they're saying that's real because I'm using that to calculate other
they'd have
properties.
to, huh? Yep.
Yeah.
No, exactly. It's so backwards. Like it depends on who you're talking to. That's a great point. Has to be. Yeah, absolutely. And then of course GPS doesn't account for any relative simultaneity effects. All of the events cohesively go in the same timeline, irrespective of anyone's motion relative to another observer. So there's no evidence of it there. So all right, yeah, just wanted to ask about that.
Let me throw the Rokfin in. I don't want to forget him real fast. Fishhead, Montana, appreciate you guys. Thank you. Or he also said, everything was created using philosophical principles arising from mind, which precedes everything and whose very nature is abstract. Yeah, that's the easiest refutation of atheism, right? Is that the intelligent agency and the mind and consciousness is the prerequisite for all the information that we have here. Thank you for the tip on Rokfin. Sickwit at $5 tip. Welcome back. What's in Mr. Streams, bro? Thank you, man. I'm glad to be back. I had to kind of take a break, get centered, but we are back at it. And Eric, $20. Great guest. Thank you. And I would have to agree. And all right, so if you guys are down to kind of wrap it up, do you have any final thoughts that you guys want to cover before we get out of here? I have another stream tonight, so I need to go eat and stuff.
No,
I'm good.
I think we've discussed everything that I think is appropriate for the slide, and I look forward to more conversations, trying to iron out what the truth is, and it's kind of hard to do when you're surrounded by a lot of media that points in the wrong direction. But yeah, I enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to more conversations.
Yeah, we got to stay in touch, brother, for sure. Let me have you guys heard of the MH370X missing plane conspiracy? Yeah, the Malaysian flight. That's old news. There were people that had important patents on it. That's why they disappeared. JD on YouTube, our super chat. Great discussion. Thanks, Austin, Alan, and Robert. Okay, and that's a good way to wrap it up. Thank you, guys. So yeah, I would love to get your contact and to stay in touch with you, man. And we can all kind of, coordinate, send each other different information and documents, and then have future discussions because, yeah, I learned a lot from you, man. And I really appreciate you coming on and laying it out and taking the time to make a presentation and present it 2 different times. So I'm thankful and grateful for you coming on.
Yeah, what you saw was basically the book that I'm writing. I put into an outline form and then made slides from it. And that's basically what you're seeing is a preview of the book, which will include more religious topics, but all of the science and more that I presented today. So when Alan asked me about the presentation, I put it together from the notes that I had.
Nice, very cool, man. Definitely let us know when you're wrapping that up or about to have it done, and we'll help promote it for you.
Got to learn more about the ether, definitely.
The endless pursuit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Alan, you got anything you want to say before we get out of here, brother?
Yeah, I'm heading out, man. I'll be on Mellow Dome tonight at 7:30 with Shane St. Pierre. We'll be doing a trivia for Troubling Tribune's family. So make sure you check that out. Send some donations over there. Send some love. And I'll be at the Mount Meru Summit Season 2 on December 8th. So check that out. And that's all I got coming up.
Season 2. Shiloh Carpenter, thank you for the $10 super chat. And thank you. Yeah, so Mount Meru 2, December 8th and 9th. Alan is one of the speakers. We got a lot of other really good speakers we'll talk about soon. So, all right, cool. Thank you again so much for coming on, Robert and Alan. Thank you for setting this up. And I will catch up with you guys soon.
Okay,
Peace.
take care.
All right, later. Much love. All right, thank you guys for hanging out. I need to go get some food. I have to run a couple errands and I have to get back, finish the PowerPoint for the debate or for the presentation tonight. And we are streaming at 9 p.m. Eastern. So that is 4 hours from now. Atheism debunked. We're going to cover the philosophical ineptitude that is formally referred to as atheism. So hopefully you guys enjoy the stream. Make sure you smash the like button, share it out there so people can really learn some of this information. I think it's super important. Thank you guys for all the support. And if you want to support the channel, links in the description. and I'll talk to you guys more about all that tonight. So that concludes episode 4 of In the Field. And again, we thank our guests for coming on, and always be respectful to the guests when they come on, because it creates an environment that people will want to come in the future. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys tonight. And as always, seek and speak truth unequivocally. The weak find contentment in the consensus of ignorance. So who cares what other people think? They're always going to attack you, right? Just speak the truth regardless. And what's popular is not true, and what's true is rarely popular. Until next time, peace.
That's for Israel. Wonder, is it real? Rappers acting say they high, say they sipping pills. Glorify suicide so they get the deals. Big pharma set it up, had to flip the pills. Control the music industry until the scripts get filled. Geopolitically, yeah, we in the field. That's for Israel. Wonder, is it real? Took the way you saw the world, then distorted it. Now you think you wanna rock that twirl somewhere orbiting. Theories disproportionate, the truth distorted quick with a forceful grip. They force him as simple that we absorbing quick. Took the people's signature that mean extorted it. They forging it if news ain't cause informants who informing them. There's a surplus, but they tell us there are shortages. Credit economy mortgages, dollar that's supported with empty fortresses. But what's important is this, we porting ships important. Yes, of course it is, but extortion is in accordance with an assortment list of foreign tricks. We ignoring which informant this, informant this. It looked like we were snoring tricked. Pedophilia and the government endorsing it. Yeah, eugenics is exactly what abortion is. You just vilify those insubordinate. Way to matrix engineer, that's unfortunate. Geopolitically, we in a field. That's for Israel. Wonder, is it real? Rappers actors say they high, say they sip with pills. Glorify suicide so they get the deals. Big pharma set it up just to flip the pills. Control the music industry until the scripts get filled. Geopolitically, yeah, we in a field. That's for Israel. Wonder, is it real?